Chapter 9:18. Lu Feng's fleshly body was placed right there, without any extravagance or embellishment. It was so plain and ordinary that everyone was so shocked that they couldn't even begin to describe what they were seeing. The shock in the void was gradually felt by those geniuses and monsters. They really couldn't understand how this physical body, which didn't have any extravagant feeling, could trigger such crazy emotions. This shouldn't be, and it should be impossible. However, this was the reality. The physical body, which didn't seem like much in their eyes, was now so shocking. This was completely inconceivable. This is unbelievable. This physical body, such an ordinary physical body, can actually cause such a shock. Could it be that there's really something magical about this physical body? In the eyes of these geniuses and monsters, the existence of the physical body was to display an invincible phenomenon and attract the praise of time and space. This was the true invincible physical body. In our family, those immortal king-level elders of the sect, when they chose to shatter their physical body and enter the immortal king realm, every time they released their invincible physical body, the immortal king taboo physical body, it would definitely cause the entire time and space to tremble. Although Lu Feng has the aura of the immortal king taboo, his physical body is really too ordinary. But why is it that this ordinary physical body has actually caused countless existences to go crazy? They couldn't understand, they really couldn't understand. However, those immortal kings didn't explain to them, because they didn't have time to explain. At this moment, they had already focused all their attention on Lu Feng. Before this, they had never thought that such a physical body could be born in the world. Such an invincible physical body was completely unbelievable and inconceivable in their eyes. However, it had really appeared, and it had appeared so simply like that. Such a scene caused their hearts to tremble indescribably, and their souls to tremble indescribably. Why is it that I don't feel a dangerous aura from this physical body, but a kind of threat, a threatening aura that can kill me at any time? Danger only meant that this physical body could hurt the owner after reaching a certain level in the future. But a threat meant that this physical body already had the power to hurt the owner. This was simply inconceivable. The person who spoke was a celestial prime, a peak flowing time celestial prime. Among the 4 great realms of immortal venerables, he belonged to the second realm, which was below the great perfection and invincible realm. But even so, it was still shocking enough. However, he actually trembled in front of the physical body of a first-layer immortal king. This was enough to explain everything. Hearing his words, countless immortal kings and immortal venerables fell silent. After a while, an immortal king nodded gently. There was a look of horror in his eyes. My cultivation realm is the limit of the immortal king realm. Among the countless immortal kings, I'm already at the absolute peak. No one is a match for me. But in front of this physical body, I feel a kind of complete suppression, a kind of suppression that suppresses even my soul. The existence of this fleshly body has definitely reached a ridiculously powerful level. I can imagine that just by relying on the existence of this physical body, Lu Feng is enough to run amok in the immortal king realm. He can make even the invincible flowing time celestial prime fear him. An ant who had just become a celestial immortal had such power. This was enough to show how heaven-defying Lu Feng was. Such a scene was too terrifying, too terrifying. Countless existences fell silent, completely and utterly silent. Because they all had the same feeling. They all felt the threat or dangerous aura of Lu Feng's physical body. Finally, they looked at the vast mottled clouds of disaster in the void. Their eyes were full of seriousness and strangeness. I can sense that the disaster this time seems to be quite different from the previous one. The disaster aura contained in it is so obvious, so eye-catching, and the disaster level seems to be far beyond the disaster aura of others. The other immortal kings nodded gently. In fact, they could also guess this point. After all, Lu Feng's physical body had already broken the limit and had an indescribable power of power. Therefore, it was completely reasonable for such a power to appear to punish him. I just don't know how Lu Feng will be able to survive this time. After taking a deep breath, everyone stopped talking and looked at the void wholeheartedly, watching the emergence of the tribulation. Standing quietly under the endless tribulation, Lu Feng was incomparably indifferent and calm. His eyes were filled with eternal brilliance, and the firmness of his will made him fearless of anything. Finally, as if it had sensed Lu Feng's provocative attitude, the calamity in the void was instantly formed. Seeing the appearance of the tribulation, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air fiercely. Their eyes were filled with indescribable shock and even trembling emotions. It's actually the 4 eras annihilation. 9 heavenly stars, 9 heavenly flames, 9 heavenly wind annihilation, 9 heavenly lightning calamity. This was the ultimate annihilation power of the great tribulation of the universe. However, in the second universe, they were the same existence and belonged to the ultimate power of the tribulation. Only the most heaven-defying existence could trigger one of the annihilation powers. Since ancient times, almost no one had been able to trigger 2 of the annihilation powers. Even if there had been, they would have been annihilated in the end. But now, 4 of them had appeared. All 4 of them had appeared. Such a scene made them really unable to think of anything else. Looking at the annihilation powers in the void, the 2 immortal masters fell silent. A moment later, they started to activate the power of the entire sacred land. Just as they had said, Lu Feng's existence was too important. They absolutely couldn't just watch Lu Feng fall like this. Therefore, they had to unleash the true power of the sacred land and use the foundation of the sacred land to save Lu Feng. However, they were fast, but there was someone even faster, and that was Lu Feng. Before they could condense the power of the tribulation, Lu Feng had already soared rapidly into the void and charged directly towards the tribulation clouds. This scene caused countless existences to be at a loss again. When others were going through the tribulation, which one of them wasn't careful and prepared with countless things? They could only get through it with more or less help from others. But what about Lu Feng? He actually chose to provoke the tribulation directly like this. This was simply indescribable. Many people were in a daze. Then, they were shocked and stunned again. Looking at Lu Feng, the 2 immortal masters were also anxious. They wanted to quickly mobilize the power of the sacred land, but it was futile because the existence of the sacred land was too huge. Moreover, even the supreme immortal master, the immortal master of the sacred land, didn't control the entire sacred land at all. He didn't even control 1/10,000th of the secrets and power of the sacred land. Rather than saying that he was the immortal master of the sacred land, it was better to say that he was just a housekeeper. He was just a housekeeper who helped to maintain order in the sacred land. They watched helplessly as Lu Feng charged into the tribulation. They were anxious, shocked, and crazy. However, in the next moment, when the scene of complete annihilation that they had expected did not appear, these people were stunned, at a loss, and then, they went crazy once again. In the midst of the endless tribulation, Lu Feng was as calm as ever. He stood there quietly, allowing the tribulation to continuously baptize his body. However, this tribulation only kept polishing Lu Feng's body, causing him to tremble constantly. It really couldn't hurt Lu Feng at all. This was completely unbelievable. There was once a heaven-defying battle constitution, but under this tribulation, it was annihilated in just one disaster. And that battle constitution is one of the most famous battle constitutions in the history of the immortal race. Even such a battle constitution couldn't withstand a single annihilation, but this Lu Feng can survive in such an environment safely? This was simply subverting their understanding of the world. Countless existences kept sucking in cold breaths, but Lu Feng was still as calm as ever. Although this kind of polishing process was very painful, Lu Feng didn't care about it. He really didn't care. After experiencing the pain from before, this kind of pain was enough to make his body react involuntarily. His soul was already able to smile in the midst of the torment. The two immortal masters, who had finally mobilized the power of the sacred land, fell silent when they saw that Lu Feng was safe and sound. They exchanged glances and saw the complicated look in each other's eyes. However, they still didn't disperse the power in their hands, because they weren't sure if Lu Feng could succeed. They weren't sure if Lu Feng could really survive all the tribulations and come out unscathed. Just like that, countless existences focused their attention on Lu Feng, appreciating the most incredible scene in history in the void. The power of the tribulation became even stronger and more eye-catching. However, Lu Feng still had an indifferent attitude towards all of this. The powerful power made his body tremble constantly. This was the reaction of the origin of his body, which was the invincible battle constitution he had condensed. If it had been any other body, it would have been completely annihilated the moment it came into contact with the tribulation, let alone tremble. Lu Feng smiled gently when he sensed the situation in his body. He was actually still able to smile. The two immortal masters also relaxed slightly when they saw Lu Feng's smile. Lu Feng could feel the strange feeling in his body, and a faint smile appeared in his eyes. It seems like my physical body has been completely refined. After such a long period of polishing, no impurities have appeared. My fleshly body has truly reached perfection. It is truly powerful now. Since there are no more impurities, there is no need for polishing. Everything can end now. Lu Feng laughed maniacally as he looked at the dark clouds that were still descending from the tribulation in the void. A moment later, a most shocking aura appeared on Lu Feng's body, one that caused everyone to tremble in fear. Chapter 9:19. This kind of aura was very simple. It was not covered by any extravagance, nor was there any turbulence in it. Everything appeared so peaceful and serene. However, after it appeared, the existence of this aura caused everyone to be shaken. They were all completely trembling, because this kind of aura was too strong. Anyone who felt the existence of this kind of aura would have an urge to fight. This is, the shock in their eyes was indescribable. Countless existences were familiar with this kind of aura. Although they had never seen or felt it in their lives, they knew this kind of aura. However, they knew this kind of aura and this kind of feeling. For them, for all the monstrous geniuses, for all the experts above the immortal king realm, this kind of aura was the greatest representation. It was the kind of invincible aura that they dreamed of having. At this moment, the most excited person was none other than the Paragon Immortal Master. He could sense the majestic aura around the ordinary-looking Lu Feng. He actually lost his usual calmness and fell into a state of madness. This is the feeling. That's right, this is the feeling. It's him, it's definitely him. Shock, it was really an unexplainable shock. He was at a loss. He didn't know what to say anymore. Because this kind of feeling was too shocking, too extreme, it filled him with a kind of madness. This is definitely him. This is the ultimate taboo realm. The ultimate taboo realm was the taboo realm of battle power. When all the experts entered the third level of the era Overlord, they would have the battle power of the 30th level. Each level would increase their battle power countless times. According to the legends, the Divine King's ultimate taboo realm was the 33rd level of the ultimate taboo realm. However, those who did not have any heaven-defying divine ability could only reach the 32nd level. The eternal immortal venerable who had been suppressed in the land of sealed demons for countless years was only at the 32nd level. The current sovereign immortal master was also at the 32nd level. They could only enter the 32nd heavenly layer. Just like what the Paragon Immortal Lord said, he wouldn't have many delusions of entering the 33rd level. One had to know that which celestial venerable or even celestial king was not a great existence with overflowing talent that could make people tremble in fear. No one else could compare to their pride. It was even more so for those who were able to become immortal masters. They were the most respected geniuses of an era or even countless eras. Even so, he still didn't believe that he could enter the ultimate heaven. Everything was because of the ultimate heaven taboo domain, which was the existence of the ultimate heaven taboo domain. To enter the 33rd layer of the extreme sky from the 32nd layer of the heavens, what is needed is no longer comprehension or aptitude. It is not something that can be achieved by anything. If you want to do that, then you must enter the ultimate heavenly combat strength. Only in this way can one truly reach the pinnacle and become an existence at the pinnacle. I didn't expect that. I still underestimated Lu Feng. I still treated him as an ordinary existence. He is now proving that the emperor that he, Lu Feng, has become is a truly great and invincible emperor. This was a truly great and unparalleled emperor. Compared to the current emperor, everything in the past was completely incomparable. No wonder, no wonder. At this moment, the Paragon Immortal Lord finally understood why Lu Feng was so confident and why he treated all disasters as nothing. He indeed had the qualifications to do so. Now, he has that invincible combat body, which is equivalent to the flowing time immortal venerable realm. He is even comparable to those peak flowing time immortal venerables. The existence of the ultimate heaven taboo domain can also defy the heavens, allowing him to possess the power of a peak flowing time immortal venerable in the ordinary immortal king realm. Once Lu Feng unleashes all of his power and the two ultimate heaven taboo domains, he will be comparable to any great perfection immortal venerable. He will become an invincible existence below the epic immortal venerable. An existence that was only a heavenly immortal was able to become an invincible existence below the epic immortal venerable. Such a situation was completely indescribable. Since ancient times, there had never been such a case. Even in the primordial immortal devil era, there was no such case. No wonder he, Lu Feng, was chosen. It turns out that he really is the only one, the strongest. The Paragon Immortal Lord sighed in silence. His eyes were incomparably complicated. After a long time, the sky finally became quiet. However, this silence was the precursor to an even more terrifying storm. Lu Feng had entered the ultimate heaven taboo domain and activated the two ultimate heaven taboo domains. At this moment, his power had become a true supreme existence, an invincible immortal venerable on par with glittering jewel immortal venerable and sky vault immortal venerable. As if sensing Lu Feng's strength and breakthrough, the dark clouds in the void became even more terrifying and extreme. Lu Feng's eyes were bright. The next moment, he smiled gently. You want me to be suppressed just because of this? Is this possible? This must be a joke. Just this alone was no threat to Lu Feng. Because he was Lu Feng, the Emperor Lu Feng. Now, he had surpassed the limits of the younger generation and reached a new peak in his life. Finally, when the dark clouds shrouded the sky to its limit, Lu Feng moved. It was really turbulent. He looked up at the sky and smiled gently. The next moment, he stretched out his arm and began to condense his invincible strength. At this moment, the most powerful strength was released. I've poured out everything I have and integrated everything I have into eternity. In this life, I will definitely be able to reach the peak. I will definitely be able to look down on all living things and become the ultimate supreme existence. I've poured out all my faith, let it bloom. Emperor, era, the era of the Emperor. This was a new sublimation of the era of the Emperor. It was Lu Feng's most powerful strength and the most terrifying extreme since ancient times. In an instant, an ancient vision appeared behind Lu Feng. It was the epitome of an era. It had completely integrated an eternal era into one. Lu Feng stood quietly in the center of the endless dynasty. His eyes were calm. The next moment, he looked at the endless turbulent dark clouds and smiled gently. Then, he waved his hand gently and pointed towards the distance. In an instant, all the existences in the entire area became one kind of power that shook the heavens and earth and shook the era. This was the true essence of the era of the Emperor, pouring out everything of an era and erasing everything. Trembling, the heavens and earth shook. Many people felt the existence of such an invincible attack and were incomparably shocked and terrified. They really couldn't describe the horror in their hearts at this moment. Such an attack is filled with the imprint of an era, and this seems to be in accordance with his will. This is definitely not some cultivation technique passed down from the ancient era. This is definitely an invincible cultivation technique that belongs to Lu Feng himself. But how could he condense such an invincible cultivation technique at such a young age? This is impossible, it shouldn't be. This is absolutely impossible. Even if the Supreme Immortal Lord condensed such a cultivation technique, it would be difficult for him to succeed. However, Lu Feng, such a simple young man with such a simple life experience, had succeeded. This was completely inconceivable. No one could believe it. However, they were unwilling to believe that this was the reality. Because Lu Feng's invincible attack had appeared and completely formed. This kind of power was unimaginable to anyone. What a terrifying and domineering attack. Such an attack is definitely the most powerful attack below the Immortal Lord level. This was really the most powerful attack below the Immortal Lord level. Many old Immortal Venerables looked at Lu Feng with a completely different gaze. In their hearts, Lu Feng was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. In the past, Lu Feng only had monstrous potential. Although he would definitely surpass them in the future, that was the future, not the present. However, at this moment, these people really couldn't and didn't dare to say anything, because the current Lu Feng was really too strong, too powerful. This was completely unexplainable terror. His attack had already left everyone speechless. This was because in the entire Supreme Holy Grounds, apart from the two Immortal Lords, no one else could match up to such an attack. This was terror. This was the power of an almighty being. This was the most invincible being. Lu Feng already had the power to obliterate almost all of them. Therefore, at this moment, in addition to the shock in everyone's eyes, there was also a kind of fear, a fear that came from the depths of their hearts. The era had exhausted the invincible power of an era. The era of emperors had finally arrived, and it was still a complete massacre. The powerful force shattered everything, causing the eternal calamity to descend from the endless dark clouds. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng still didn't waver. He was still the craziest counterattack, the most violent killing. Collision, in an instant, a collision. Everyone seemed to feel that the entire world, the entire time, and the entire era had an indescribable feeling of shock. At this moment, many monstrous geniuses were directly paralyzed on the ground. This collision was between the era and the origin power of heaven and earth. Any kind of existence was unimaginably terrifying, filled with the invincible majesty of heaven and earth. Therefore, the majesty born from such a collision was absolutely unimaginable and indescribable. Chapter 920. Even the immortal kings were affected by the terrifying majesty. They unconsciously began to retreat and used their powerful strength to counteract the negative effects of this majesty. Unfortunately, all of their efforts were in vain. Soon, many figures walked out of the void. These were all true extreme Tao experts. They were all above the immortal king realm. In the end, they couldn't bear it and walked out of the void. They used a huge amount of power to resist the majesty in the void. However, in the next moment, a hazy light appeared in this vast world. It was exceptionally dazzling and beautiful, making people feel relaxed and happy. Its appearance covered every corner of the entire sacred ground. Looking at this scene, many people finally relaxed slightly. They knew that this hazy light was the existence of power. And this power was the protective power of the sacred ground. Under such power, not to mention a collision between perfected immortal venerables, even a collision between immortal masters wouldn't be affected much unless it was in the 33rd layer of the ultimate heaven. After all, the sacred ground was the sacred ground. Sure enough, under the cover of this endless light, all the majesty instantly disappeared. There was no longer any power that could harm them. The appearance of this light not only made the majesty disappear, but also restored clarity to the entire world. After a long time, there was no longer any aura of calamity in the world. At this moment, only Lu Feng's figure existed. He stood quietly between heaven and earth, quietly looking down on everything, incomparably indifferent. Everyone looked at Lu Feng with incomparable admiration in their eyes. They could only look up. They had to look up. This was because Lu Feng had already entered an unimaginable and unreachable realm. Lu Feng looked at the many existences quietly. Slowly, he dispersed the two forbidden domains. In an instant, Lu Feng slowly descended from the void and directly landed on the ground. In the sacred ground, flying was completely forbidden. It could be said that unless one really walked into the domain of the Divine King, or the Immortal King, otherwise one couldn't fly. And after withdrawing from the two forbidden domains, Lu Feng was naturally no longer an immortal king. Therefore, he could only wait quietly on the ground. Looking at the many immortal kings who were still in the void, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with calmness for the first time, even a look of disdain. No one could say anything about Lu Feng's expression, because they knew that Lu Feng really had the qualifications to do so. Lu Feng was an emperor, a true emperor. There was no need to say more about his strength. With that invincible attack, Lu Feng's existence is definitely the strongest expert in the sacred ground apart from the two great immortal masters. They sighed slightly. Although they did not want to admit that they, who had cultivated for thousands of years, were inferior to a young man who had only cultivated for a few decades, the reality was that they had no choice but to admit it. After looking around, Lu Feng finally lowered his head slowly. At this moment, he was filled with nostalgia and nostalgia. In the original universe, godly kings are the pillars of a pinnacle overlord race, said Luo Feng. They are the greatest beings, and they won't appear in the universe. Aside from their names, very few of them have left the universe. Back then, the human race thought of all sorts of ways to have a divine king, but it was to no avail. The Lu family stabilized the chaos for 500 years. What a great honor this was! But there was so much bitterness, helplessness, pain, and sorrow involved in this. If it weren't for the fact that the human race did not have a divine king, then why would we need the Lu family's heretic supreme to stabilize the chaos in the sky for 500 years? Back then, the human race relied on the Lu family to stabilize the chaos for a whole 500 years. This was an affirmation of the Lu family and also a denial of the human race. In the past, the human race was the #1 overlord race in the universe. Their tyrannical power was revered by the world. However, in the end, they needed the support of a family. They needed a human king, the Lu family, to painstakingly support the hope of the human race's existence so that other races would not dare to offend the human race. This was so sad. This was so ironic for a peak overlord race, even the #1 peak overlord race in the past. Lu Feng exhaled softly. But it's different now. It's really different. Lu Feng could feel that he had become stronger once again. Once he entered the Divine King's forbidden mythological domain, he would be even more unbeatable. The time I can enter the forbidden mythological domain of combat power has also increased along with my breakthrough in level. This time, it's even more heaven-defying and perverted. I can feel that the terrifying time I can enter the forbidden mythological domain has been extended by dozens of times. Although he had yet to try it out, Lu Feng could feel that the time he could spend in the forbidden mythological domain had definitely exceeded the limits of anyone's imagination. At the very least, he could stay there for one day. One day, an entire day. Compared to the few minutes he had to flee in a sorry state back then, this was much, much more time. One day's time, coupled with my current accumulation and these two invincible domains, will give me the ultimate power to sweep away everything. The current Lu Feng was the divine king of Chaos Stabilizer. This existence, who had once been a mythical existence in his eyes, was far from comparable. Lu Feng was confident that he did not even need to use the era of the Emperor to face the divine king of Chaos Stabilizer. Just the addition of the two invincible domains would be enough to easily suppress him. Looking at his simple hands and feeling his own existence, Lu Feng smiled gently. This is me, right? This is the real me now, right? I don't know when, but I've already reached such a level. I can already look down on all the supreme masters in the primal universe. I'm afraid that even the greatest ancestor existences will be completely suppressed when they see me. They will also be blown up by me in an instant. Who would have thought that, in their eyes, I was just an ant with potential and could be killed at any time? Now I've actually reached such a level. Lu Feng smiled gently, shook his head, and then closed his eyes slightly. At this moment, everyone's gazes were focused on him again. They could feel that the current Lu Feng seemed to be undergoing some kind of transformation. Indeed, in the next moment, a vague feeling appeared around Lu Feng. In an instant, countless forces covered him and rushed into Lu Feng's body. Sensing the emergence of such forces, many immortal kings had strange expressions on their faces. This was because even they did not know where exactly this force was born. In the void, the two great immortal masters, who were still hiding in the void, smiled gently. After a moment of feeling, the guide finally said with a slight sigh of admiration, "In the primal universe, although their strength is far from being comparable to ours, they are not completely useless. At the very least, such means are something that we do not have." Sacrificing countless forces into the primal power of the origin and hiding it in the dark. And this kind of power is completely exclusive. Only Lu Feng alone can use it. In this way, it has an immeasurable effect on the development of a genius. Beside him, Sovereign Immortal Master nodded gently. Actually, compared to us, it's easier to develop in the primal universe. After all, they are the only universe that existed after the primal immortal era was shattered. They have an infinitely vast world. But it's a pity that because of the existence of the great calamity of the universe, they are unable to pass on their legacy. Hearing this, the guide fell silent for a moment. After a moment, he nodded gently. What a terrifying great calamity! It's really indescribable. Even the immortal masters of the 33rd level of the ultimate heaven are unable to withstand it and are about to fall completely. And to survive such a calamity, one has to be a supreme ruler. This is really too terrifying. According to what Lu Feng said, such calamities have already happened countless times. Sad, really sad. Sovereign Immortal Master fell silent for a moment, but a strange light flashed in his eyes. Finally, he nodded gently and looked down at Lu Feng, who was constantly absorbing the endless power, endless power, all gushed into Lu Feng's body and soul. At this moment, Lu Feng's realm was undergoing a terrifying transformation. From the beginner stage of the Sky Immortal Realm, he rapidly entered the intermediate stage and then the advanced stage. However, just as Lu Feng was about to seize the opportunity to break through and reach the pinnacle, this power dried up and completely disappeared. The power of the King's Prayer was formed by a few hundred virtual king great beings joining forces and contributing half of their power. It was comparable to the power of a divine king. However, This power was not that terrifying for Lu Feng. After all, his accumulation was too extreme, too terrifying and unsolvable. Now, from the beginner stage of the Sky Immortal Realm to the pinnacle stage of the Sky Immortal Realm, the power he needed was comparable to the power used by any immortal king. Sensing Lu Feng's current state, many people fell silent, their eyes filled with endless shock. They also felt it. From the beginning of his breakthrough until now, the power Lu Feng absorbed was comparable to the total accumulation of an immortal king. However, such a terrifying accumulation was unable to allow him to break through and reach the pinnacle. Such accumulation was really. This Emperor Lu Feng's accumulation is also unprecedented. I'm afraid that even if he doesn't enter the two forbidden domains, his power is enough to support him to fight against an immortal king who doesn't use the forbidden domain. Thinking of this possibility, many people helplessly smiled bitterly. Originally, this was something they would never think of. After all, such a possibility was simply not allowed to exist. However, when all of this was related to Lu Feng, they would not doubt it, and they could not doubt anything. Silence. For a long time, there was endless silence. At this moment, many people were thinking about how Lu Feng would break through next. However, soon, they understood Lu Feng's plan. In an instant, countless power emerged from Lu Feng's body again. This power was much more powerful than the power of the king's prayer just now. It was not on the same level at all. Everyone thought of what this power was. As expected, he didn't waste the power crystal from before. He actually stored it in his body, waiting for the time when he needs it. It will be completely released to provide for him to break through continuously. This power was the power crystallization that they had guessed. The existence of this power crystallization allowed Lu Feng to take advantage of the opportunity to break through. In the blink of an eye, Lu Feng had really broken all the shackles in the most powerful way possible and entered the domain of a peak celestial immortal. However, this was not the end, because Lu Feng still had another domain that he had not broken through. Up until now, he had already entered the God King's domain several times. Therefore, Lu Feng was extremely clear about the God King's previous feelings. Even if he didn't understand the contents of the Origin Sutra with a single glance, he could basically comprehend it at any moment. Therefore, Lu Feng made crazy breakthroughs as a telekinesis master and directly entered the peak of the Celestial Master realm. After sensing that the power of both sides had entered the peak, Lu Feng finally stopped absorbing power and exhaled gently. Up until now, all my battles have been in the aspect of using martialists. It has no use for me as a telekinesis master, but I can't let go of the telekinesis master aspect. I don't need to use anything else. Just a little bit is enough. Just a little bit was enough. And that little bit was the power of 1 billion mortal worlds and 1 billion immortals. His existence and the existence of the second primordial spirit controlled the mortal worlds and transformed into immortals at the same time. Therefore, if the telekinesis master could not keep up, it would be impossible to unleash the ultimate power of 1 billion mortal worlds and 1 billion immortals. After sensing that he had entered the peak, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. However, there was not much joy on his face, because he knew that this kind of strength was still not enough, even if he broke the power of 2 forbidden domains. Chapter 9:21. However, it was still not enough. It was really not enough. He was looking at the future. Actually, the current me can still improve even faster. I know that my return is really not far away. The crystallization of power was really too powerful. This allowed Lu Feng to save a lot of time. According to the normal speed, it would definitely take him more than 100 years, or even a few hundred years, to go from the great success stage of the great demon body of Armageddon to the perfect stage. Even if there were endless battles, the time needed would be an astronomical figure. However, with this crystallization of power, Lu Feng could rush into the perfect stage as soon as possible. Although my foundation is unstable because I have lost the battles and training. However, there are still the other two Holy Lands and the Tower of Trials in them. By relying on the training in the Tower of Trials, then I will really rush into the peak domain of invincibility. It won't take long. It really won't take long. When I set foot in the other two Holy Lands, I'll get the origins, and I'll merge with the origins of Sky Stupa. Then it'll be time for me, Lu Feng, to return to the original universe. Previously, he still remembered that if he wanted to return to the original universe, he had to be at least a time immortal master, which was the battle power of level 30. However, if all three of his domains were mythical, then he would truly have the battle power of the 33rd floor of the ultimate heaven. At that time, he would be truly invincible. He would truly belong to the primordial immortal demon supreme master, the most invincible existence after the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the Shakyamuni Buddha and the human king. Such a Lu Feng symbolized the pinnacle and invincibility. In the world, there was almost no one who could compare to him. Finally, after completing the integration of the pinnacle, Lu Feng's aura completely calmed down. Now, he was at the pinnacle. Everything was at the pinnacle. Not only was he at the pinnacle of his cultivation as a martial artist, but he was also at the pinnacle of his cultivation as a spiritual master. There was no doubt that the current him, even if he did not enter the forbidden domain, was still the most shocking existence. Looking at everything, the state of Lu Feng's original body would truly be the most invincible power below the immortal king. This was the current Lu Feng. Very swiftly, many existences walked out from the void. These were all immortal kings who were previously hidden in the boundless void. All of them appeared and came before Lu Feng. All along, the gazes of these immortal kings were filled with disdain when they looked at those demon-level geniuses. After all, monstrous geniuses only represented potential. On the other hand, they were existences who had already reached great success. There was no way those monsters could compare to them. Monsters are just monsters. Let's not talk about whether they have the possibility and ability to reach the end and reach the limit of their potential. Even if they really develop it and reach the limit, what can they do? The result is still the same. Even if they reach their limits, their strongest state would only be on par with these immortal kings. At that time, even after these monstrous geniuses had matured, they would only be existences with similar statuses. Why do they need so much respect? So, looking down is exactly how it should be. However, these people really don't dare to do that to Lu Feng. Because what Lu Feng represents is not only a potential that far surpasses theirs, but also a kind of strength, an incomparably powerful strength. The current Lu Feng was almost comparable to any perfected flowing time, immortal venerable. Such strength was enough to shock both ancient and modern times. So, these immortal kings don't dare to put on any airs in front of Lu Feng. Sighing softly, the two immortal masters in the void had incomparably strange expressions on their faces. All along, it had been the immortal kings who were high and mighty, waiting for those geniuses and monstrous geniuses to worship and pay tribute. But this time it had completely changed. In front of Lu Feng, these immortal kings had all chosen to put down their reservations and pride and took the initiative to look for Lu Feng. This was the benefit of strength. This was the change in identity and status with strength. Staring at the immortal kings around him, Lu Feng laughed lightly. He didn't have any reservations at all. With his current status and level, he was already powerful and terrifying enough. Naturally, his mentality had also changed. He definitely wouldn't be like those monstrous geniuses, who were filled with nervousness and worship when they saw an immortal king. Congratulations, young Master Lu. This time, you've obtained shocking benefits. From now on, the world will be yours to roam. Lu Feng chuckled. He didn't admit or deny it. Congratulatory voices kept coming from the surroundings, which made Lu Feng sigh endlessly. Once upon a time, in his heart, becoming a god was an incomparably heaven-defying thing. But now, in the eyes of the gods, the divine king, who was always unreachable, was surrounding him and constantly congratulating him, trying to leave a good impression on him. This was a change, and all these changes had only happened in a short few decades. Looking at the immortal kings around Lu Feng, countless monstrous geniuses fell silent and then sighed. They were all monstrous geniuses, and there were even many supreme kings among them, which were emperor-level monstrous geniuses. Such existences would definitely be crowned kings in the future and become supreme immortal kings. But before they were crowned kings, they were definitely only monstrous geniuses. When they saw immortal kings, they had to bow respectfully and couldn't overstep their boundaries in the slightest. But now Lu Feng, who was also a monstrous genius like them, had already been surrounded by countless immortal kings and given the most honorable treatment. Moreover, other than immortal kings, there were also many immortal supremacies among them. Even if they had reached the realm of great success, when they saw immortal supremacies, they still had to have a sincere attitude. From this point, it could be seen that they were not on the same level as Lu Feng. Lu Feng and the immortal kings didn't chat for too long, because at this time, two figures descended from the void. Seeing the existence of these two figures, all the immortal kings and immortal supremacies bowed respectfully and left the place. Seeing the two of them, Lu Feng also bowed respectfully. Although they didn't help him in the end, their actions still made Lu Feng feel grateful. Immortal Masters. The ones who appeared were the guide and the supreme immortal master. Looking at Lu Feng, the supreme immortal master smiled lightly, but avoided Lu Feng's greeting. Seeing this scene, many immortal kings were slightly stunned, and their expressions were incomparably strange. However, the most strange thing was still shock. It was really incomparable shock, because they didn't expect that even the two immortal masters wouldn't dare to accept Lu Feng's greeting. Lu Feng didn't care about the supreme immortal master's actions at all. After he was done, he straightened his body. Lu Feng, come with me. There are some things we can talk about. Lu Feng nodded lightly. The next moment, as the supreme immortal master waved his arm gently, Lu Feng and the two immortal masters completely disappeared. Between heaven and earth, there were only many immortal kings and demons left. Those immortal kings looked at the place where the Tower of Trials was supposed to be and felt lost. They had entered the Tower of Trials several times, but unfortunately in the end. Among them, the furthest they went was only the 13th level. It was still too far away from the 18th level at the peak. Therefore, the ultimate secret, even if what was in the next few levels, they had no way of knowing. It's a pity. This place of trials that has existed since ancient times is still very useful for tempering the body. The disappearance of the Tower of Trials is probably a sign of the birth of many things. To be able to become an immortal king, none of them were idiots. In the original universe, those ancestral immortal kings all felt the difference in the era. They all understood that the era had changed, and something shocking was about to happen. And here, it was naturally the same. Naturally, these people also understood these things. When they saw the number of monstrous geniuses erupting like a geyser in this era, they already understood and understood. 5,000 years ago, that taboo existence came and swept across the entire world. He suppressed the 5 ultimate kings completely and caused the immortal masters of the 3 holy lands to be unable to do anything. He became the truly recognized number 1 great being. Not long after that, the Emperor chose to forcefully break through and entered the ultimate heaven of the 33rd layer. He reigned supreme for all eternity. I'm afraid he's also waiting for a chance. As long as the chance comes, then with the support of the power accumulated in those eras, he will definitely have the chance and hope to break through to the greatest realm. The other 4 ultimate kings seem to have decided to break through as well. They were silent and reincarnated for a total of 11 eras. Finally, they decided to break through in this era and become invincible beings. This can only prove that a shocking change will happen in this era. These invincible beings have no choice but to do so. Even those as strong as them have made such a choice. Then, where should we go from here? As immortal venerables and immortal kings, they had always been lofty existences that were respected by millions of people. But at this moment they were truly at a loss. They didn't know what to do. This was a great sorrow and a great irony. However, the reality was as such. They sighed deeply. Their eyes were filled with incomparable turmoil. Lu Feng, what secrets are there in the 18th level? The moment they arrived at a void, the Supreme Immortal Master asked without hesitation. Hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent. After a moment, he finally sighed deeply. Lu Feng knew that now was the time. He didn't need to hide anything anymore. Although the Sovereign Immortal Master wasn't someone he could contend against, it was impossible for him to kill him. Because he, Lu Feng, was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. Of course, it was impossible to rely on his own battle strength. But don't forget that Lu Feng had already obtained 1/3 of Fuda's origin. Even 1/3 of Fuda's origin was enough for Lu Feng to activate Fuda's main body. And the main body's existence could definitely guarantee his safety. Therefore, Lu Feng did not hesitate at all. He had already decided to explain everything clearly. The next moment, a hazy shadow of a huge object appeared behind Lu Feng. Sensing Lu Feng's actions, the two of them were slightly startled. Immortal Demon Avatar? Lu Feng nodded slightly. Looking at the heaven-reaching Futu that was slowly forming behind him, his eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. Here, you call it Immortal Demon Avatar. In the original universe, it's called Martial Path Avatar. And my Martial Path Avatar is this. Chapter 922. The two great immortal masters were filled with excitement. They also wanted to see what kind of great immortal demon avatar Lu Feng, the number 1 demon in history, had condensed. However, when the two of them saw the immortal demon avatar, they were suddenly dumbfounded. How is this possible? Lu Feng didn't find it strange that the two of them were so shocked. After all, sky-piercing Futu was not eye-catching in the original universe, and it was the same here as well. However, this was only relative to those ordinary beings. For those pinnacle great beings, sky-piercing Futu would be the most shocking. Looking at the two great immortal masters' silent expressions, Lu Feng knew that they definitely knew about the existence of sky-piercing Futu. Lu Feng asked with a slight frown, I wonder if the two immortal masters know where the secret of sky-piercing Futu lies? Hearing this, the two of them still remained silent. After a long time, they finally sighed slightly and spoke slowly. We know, how could we not know? To some ants and ordinary existences, they don't know what a stupa is. However, for us who control the 3 Holy Lands, we are extremely familiar with what Futu is. At this moment, a dazzling light appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. He looked at the two great immortal masters and hurriedly asked, Then, what exactly does this Futu represent? What is its significance? Lu Feng really could not wait to find out. After all, this was related to the existence of all his secrets. Hearing Lu Feng's question, the sovereign immortal master smiled, but it was an extremely bitter smile. His eyes were filled with too much helplessness and bitterness. Its significance is incomparably huge. It can be said that the establishment of the 3 Holy Lands is most directly related to it. However, I am not sure what it is exactly. Although I know a little about this Futu, you should be able to understand it. I am unable to say anything about it. In fact, I am unable to express it. I can only silently know about it, but I am unable to explain it to anyone. Lu Feng was silent for a moment before he gently nodded his head. He felt very helpless. However, Lu Feng also knew that the sovereign immortal lord was right. This was the truth of the matter. Fotu was the ultimate existence of the 14th rank. Even the 8 invincible sacred lords of the primordial, immortal, and devil era couldn't compare to him in terms of strength. Apart from him, there was no one else in the world who could compete with him. These 2 ultimate existences had already surpassed the limits of greatness. They were existences that didn't even have the qualifications to engrave history, and didn't even have the ability to engrave time and space. Hence, even though the Paragon Immortal Lord knew about it, he couldn't say it out loud. This was only natural. Silence. Endless silence. Then Lu Feng sighed deeply. Actually, there isn't any danger on the 18th floor. The 17th floor is the pinnacle of danger and suffering. On the 18th floor of China, there are only 2 great lights. The 2 immortal lords looked at Lu Feng with a rare solemn expression. They knew that Lu Feng was about to reveal all the secrets. They were extremely curious and concerned about the secrets of the Tower of Trials that had existed for countless years. Hence, when they heard that Lu Feng was about to reveal them, they were filled with endless interest. Looking at their expressions, Lu Feng smiled faintly. These 2 great lights aren't anything else. They are 2 great origins. They are 2 complete origins. The 2 looked at each other and frowned slightly. There were many origins. However, how could ordinary origins have the qualifications to enter the core of the Holy Land, the 18th floor of the Tower of Trials? However, the 2 didn't say anything. They knew that since Lu Feng had said so much, he would definitely tell them everything. Sure enough, in the next moment, Lu Feng spoke directly. The 2 great origins are both extraordinary existences. The first one is the physical body taboo origin. In an instant, the 2's eyes flickered slightly. They looked at Lu Feng and vaguely understood something. It seems like you've gained a lot of benefits. There must be a lot of benefits. Otherwise, how could Lu Feng possess power that was comparable to the perfected age immortal venerable? Lu Feng chuckled and nodded. Indeed. I shattered the 3 great battle constitutions and then integrated the physical body taboo origin. This allowed my physical body to increase by 11 times. Then, I fused the 3 great battle constitutions and finally formed my current physical body. These weren't things that couldn't be said. Hence, Lu Feng didn't hesitate at all when he said it. Hearing this, the 2 fell silent. After a moment, a trace of fear flashed across their eyes. Although Lu Feng didn't explain in detail, how could these people not know how dangerous it was? They were really frightened. But soon, as if thinking of something, the guide suddenly spoke. But that's not right. Although the physical body taboo origin is very precious, it depends on what it's compared to. Compared to the 18 levels of the Trial Tower, the physical body taboo origin is really nothing. It's nothing at all. Could it be that the second ball of light is filled with the real secret? Previously, Lu Feng was puzzled by the existence of the physical body taboo origin. Naturally, the 2 immortal masters weren't idiots. They were also the same. Lu Feng nodded gently. The second ball of light also contains the origin. However, this origin is only 1/3 of the complete origin. This is the origin that belongs to Fotu. The 2 looked at Lu Feng with an indescribable expression. Lu Feng didn't expect that the 2 of them would have such an expression. After a while, the sovereign immortal master retracted his expression and sighed deeply. It's actually the origin of Fotu. No wonder, no wonder. Indeed, besides the Buddha's quintessence, there's nothing else that has the qualifications to compare with the 18 levels of the Tower of Trials in terms of nobility, mystery, and world-shocking. But it's still a pity. There's only the origin of Fotu, but it doesn't contain the existence of Fotu. This origin is still useless. The original body of Fotu has been completely lost in the end. Such a great existence, but in the end, even the traces of its existence have disappeared. Sad, sad, sad. The sovereign immortal master said the word sad 3 times in a row. It was obvious that he felt endless regret for the loss of Futu. Futu only had the origin and didn't have the original body. Therefore, even if it was complete, it would be useless. This was because the origin was the foundation, the power to activate it. But without something to activate it, it would be useless no matter how strong it was. This was very sad, very sad. Lu Feng chuckled. Since he had already decided, there was no need to hide anything. Furthermore, once he obtained the 3 great origins, he would be able to enter the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level. Once he gathered all the origins, he would be able to summon the Babel Stupa. At that time, it would be better to let them know now. Anyway, this thing belonged to him, and no one could take it away. Actually, I know where the original body of Futu is. In an instant, the two of them looked at Lu Feng. Lu Feng could feel the turmoil in their eyes. The two of them were incomparably excited at this moment. It could be said that they were crazily excited. Previously, Lu Feng's heaven-defying performance might have made the two of them excited, but Lu Feng could feel that their hearts were still calm at that time. However, it was different now. It was completely different, because the two of them were truly crazy and extremely excited. How is this possible? You said that you know the whereabouts of Futu? You said that you know where Futu is? Do you really know? Lu Feng didn't understand their excitement, because he didn't know the reason. However, the two of them were really excited. After all, only they knew what Futu represented and how great and unrivaled Futu was. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. At this moment, he also vaguely felt that something wasn't right. Therefore, he didn't hide anything. Instead, he said directly, "Actually, Futu has always existed in my consciousness. It has always existed." In an instant, the two of them looked at Lu Feng with an indescribable expression. The way they looked at Lu Feng was too complicated and unimaginable. After a long time, Lu Feng finally let out a long sigh. Although I don't know why. However, Futu has always existed in my consciousness. My current transformation has an inseparable relationship with the existence of Futu. The two of them gradually believed his words. Yes, if it hadn't been for the existence of Futu, Lu Feng's transformation would have been impossible. Back then, the human king had already surpassed the 5 ultimate kings. The current Lu Feng was even more terrifying than the human king by an entire level. This was completely unreasonable. However, it had happened now. Therefore, they really couldn't think of anything else besides the help of Futu. It was just that these two immortal masters would never understand, and would never understand, that although Futu's assistance to Lu Feng was enormous, it was far, far from the extreme degree that they had imagined. Lu Feng and the two immortal masters were silent. They were silently thinking about their own thoughts. However, Lu Feng soon discovered something. He saw the incomparable excitement on the faces of the Supreme Immortal Master and the Guide. In fact, they were even more excited than before. Seeing this, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment before asking, "Your Majesty Supreme Immortal Master, may I know the significance of the appearance of Futu?" The Supreme Immortal Master looked at Lu Feng and smiled. It was really a happy smile. The existence of Futu is incomparably great. Although I can't explain it in detail, there are 2 major uses of Futu. However, I still know about them. First, it's devil vanquishing. You should know about the real underground monsters. Lu Feng nodded lightly. Not only did he know, but he had also experienced countless battles. Moreover, Lu Feng's understanding of these underground monsters was extremely deep. From the ancient End era, the Eternal Immortal Master, who was also at the 32nd heaven, had told him that the existence of the Buddha was an unimaginable threat to these demonic creatures. Therefore, this devil-vanquishing ability was very real. Second, its support. Futu is a real existence that can support everything. It had another name in the primordial immortal devil era. And this name is the backbone of the era. The backbone of the era. At this moment, Lu Feng's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He really didn't expect this Futu to be such a great existence. The backbone of the era, the entire backbone of the era. This was the primordial immortal devil era. There were tens of millions of immortal kings and 8 unparalleled sovereigns. To become the backbone of the era in such an era, this was too shocking. Chapter 923. The backbone of an era. What a terrifying title, what a shocking title. Could it be that Futu has some deeper meaning? Lu Feng's eyes were filled with a strange light. He definitely had feelings for Futu that were different from any other. Hence, even if it was the smallest thing, he still wanted to know and understand. Sovereign Immortal Master looked at Lu Feng and was silent for a moment. After a while, he nodded his head lightly and heavily. The backbone of an era, this is definitely not a casual title. Because the existence of Futu can really support an era. At the end of the primitive immortal era, there was a shocking battle. I don't know the details and I'm not sure. However, in the inherited memories of the supreme immortal lineage, there is a sentence. That is, Futu appeared, carried an era, and solidified the collapse. Carried an era, solidified the collapse. This caused Lu Feng to feel shocked from the bottom of his heart, incomparably shocked. He looked at the 2 immortal masters and took a deep breath. Lu Feng understood that these 2 were not joking. Since they said so, then it must be true. Definitely it must be true. Definitely it must be true. This was what really shocked him. The existence of Futu can support everything. If you can restore it to its complete state, then we can leave this place and head to the primal universe. His eyes were filled with a strange light. Lu Feng looked at Sovereign Immortal Master. His lips moved slightly, but he still did not say anything. Sovereign Immortal Master looked at Lu Feng and smiled gently. He said slowly, "Actually, the 3 Holy Lands have never given up on heading to the primal universe. Because it exists only in the primal universe. And it is our eternal pursuit. It is also the ultimate pursuit of countless living beings." The ultimate pursuit. What a great title! Lu Feng looked at Sovereign Immortal Master and did not say anything. He just quietly let them look at him. Seeing the strange expressions on the guide and Lu Feng's faces, Sovereign Immortal Master finally said it. Originally, this was the greatest secret of the Holy Land. However, now that the final era is about to arrive, there is no meaning in keeping it. The ultimate faith and hope of countless living beings lies in the original universe. Luo Feng continued. And that place is called Final Destination. The Final Destination. Hearing these words, Lu Feng felt a little strange, as if there was an indescribable tremor in his soul. However, when he tried to search for it carefully, he realized that the feeling disappeared instantly. Lu Feng was puzzled, but he couldn't find out anything. All he could do was be puzzled. Final Destination, what kind of place is that? Lu Feng was slightly puzzled. In the universe, everything that carried the name of the Final Destination was a terrifying existence that shocked the world. They were the absolute ultimate existences. Obviously, this Final Destination contained a shocking secret. Looking at Lu Feng, Sovereign Immortal Master's eyes flashed with a determined light. The Final Destination is the true eternal land. It is also the final destination of countless living beings. Legend has it that the Final Destination contains all the secrets of the origin. If you can break through the Final Destination and enter the true Final Destination, then you will be able to see billions of space-time and the most fundamental secrets of the endless eternity. You will be able to enter a brand new domain. The Final Destination was a world that contained hope and a future. A brand new world that opened up. Lu Feng suddenly understood and nodded lightly. At this moment, Lu Feng's mind started to imagine continuously. He was thinking about all the gains and losses. However, this thought soon faded away. Lu Feng just smiled gently. Yes. If I can't even guarantee my life and death, if I can't be sure that I can survive this terrifying calamity, then what's the point of thinking about other things? The battle in the future is filled with unknowns and true turbulence. If there are no great beings from the primitive immortal era participating, then just relying on those existences in the universe will definitely not be able to resist anything. Compared to here, that place is really too weak. Lu Feng also knew and understood that the strength of the original universe was really too weak. Over there, the existence of the Divine King was already an absolute ancestor existence in a pinnacle overlord race. He could suppress the fate energy and allow a pinnacle overlord race to exist forever. But over here, just in the three holy lands, the Divine King was only an immortal king. He was really nothing. Although he was still powerful, there were many who were more powerful than immortal kings. If we lose the great beings from the primitive immortal era, then just relying on the foundation of the original universe, it's impossible, not the slightest bit possible. After all, this is a great calamity that affects the universe. This is the most terrifying calamity since ancient times. Moreover, Lu Feng still had his own ideas. The next moment, he looked at Sovereign Immortal Master. After a moment of silence, he finally said slowly, "Your Majesty, Sovereign Immortal Master, actually, I have some matters that I need your help with. Of course, this is only after I return to the original universe that I will need your help." The Sovereign Immortal Master glanced at Lu Feng and nodded his head lightly. Naturally, he understood the current situation. It could be said that Lu Feng's existence was absolutely irreplaceable. And when he heard Lu Feng say that he could actually reflect the complete Fudu, he was even more certain of his thoughts. Hence, whether it was for the endless living beings or for his own future existence, he had to help Lu Feng and help Lu Feng achieve everything. Hence, Sovereign Immortal Master didn't even ask about the matter. He just nodded lightly. Seeing this, Lu Feng smiled lightly. Actually, it's not a big deal. If I wait until I return to the original universe, I think I can still do it with my own power. But just in case, I still hope that you can help me stabilize everything. In the original universe, there is a mysterious power. They are so powerful that it's really unimaginable. It can be said that even if the many pinnacle overlords in the original universe join forces, without relying on their foundation, they will still be completely unable to contend against them. This power isn't a friendly power. I really don't know what their ultimate goal is. However, I am certain that their existence is for some evil purpose. It can be said that they are enemies with many orthodox powers of the universe. They are a power that doesn't integrate with the universe. Lu Feng understood that God Slayer was indeed a power that didn't integrate with the universe. Not for other reasons, but just the fact that they had lured those martial arts avatars to betray them was enough to explain a lot. Actually, even without the help of the three holy lands and the original universe, Lu Feng was confident that after he returned, he would be able to suppress everything. According to what the Time Overlord said, it seemed that the most powerful among God Slayer was the Prophet. And the existence of the Prophet was definitely not an existence that had reached the level of an era overlord. According to Lu Feng's guess, the Prophet was at most a Time Overlord who had reached the level of perfection. And if that was the case, then Lu Feng's current level was enough to contend against him. After executing the ultimate immortal technique, 1 billion mortal dust, 1 billion immortals, he could even suppress him. This was already enough. Of course, all this was only relative to the current Lu Feng. Because if Lu Feng wanted to return to the original universe, then he had to become an era overlord. And if he became an era overlord, he would probably be able to shatter the 4 great forbidden mythological domains. By then, he would have the combat power of the 33rd level of the ultimate heaven. Such combat power was already the pinnacle in the endless eras. In history, including the history of the immortal devil era, there were probably less than 20 people who could completely suppress him. It could be said that by then, Lu Feng would really be invincible. A mere god slayer, a mere time immortal master who had reached the level of perfection, was really nothing. Of course, besides being crazy when doing things, Lu Feng's biggest habit was to have everything under control. He did not want any accidents to happen. After all, the destructive power of a great being like the Divine King was really too terrifying. Any negligence would make him regret it for the rest of his life. It was because of this that Lu Feng had never given up. He could not and would not give up any opportunity to eliminate all dangers. Hearing Lu Feng's words and looking at Lu Feng's solemn expression, the sovereign immortal master smiled gently and nodded. He didn't even ask for any information and directly agreed to it. Because to them, there was no such thing as justice or not in this world. Hence, justice was only the rules that the great beings had set for themselves. In this world, strength was the most important. Obviously, in the eyes of the sovereign immortal master, Lu Feng's existence was justice, the truth of everything. Hence, everything that Lu Feng said and asked to be done, the sovereign immortal master believed that it was a righteous action that had to be followed. Seeing that the sovereign immortal master had agreed, Lu Feng also smiled gently. Actually, this organization is really incomparably evil. There was once an evil curse in the original universe that would cause the Divine King to die a horrible death. And this Divine King is the immortal King Supreme. One of the main culprits that allowed this evil curse to exist and continue to exist, or perhaps the main culprit, should be this organization. They have shocking methods and can do things that many people can't imagine. For example, they can make their martial incarnation, which is the immortal devil incarnation, full of intelligence and then devour the main body and replace it in an instant. The sovereign immortal master and the guide were filled with indescribable shock. They looked at Lu Feng as if they did not know what to say. After a long time, the sovereign immortal master sighed heavily, his eyes filled with complicated emotions. Lure, the immortal devil apparition full of intelligence, and then betray the main body. This kind of method is really shocking. Chapter 924. No one in the second universe would be able to pull off such a feat. After a brief moment of silence, the sovereign immortal lord glanced at Lu Feng. He directly spoke of his thoughts. Lu Feng, the God Punisher organization, is definitely not simple. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Naturally, Lu Feng knew that God Punisher was not simple. In fact, it was extremely terrifying. Moreover, Lu Feng was certain of one thing, and that was that they were after something big. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to possess such powerful strength and yet remain hidden without revealing anything. Perhaps you don't know how heaven-defying such a feat is. However, I can tell you that there must be an absolutely terrifying and invincible being behind the God Punisher organization to achieve such a feat. I'm afraid this invincible being is also at the immortal venerable level. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with shock. He looked at the sovereign immortal master in disbelief. Impossible. How could the God Punisher have an immortal master? If they really have an immortal master, they could completely disregard the foundations of the various peak Overlord races and completely crush them. The peak Overlord races all had a shocking foundation. Even after the peak Overlord races had fallen from their pedestal, not many races would want to go against them or have any ideas about them. The reason for this was that there was no Overlord of an era Overlord. It could be said that the peak Overlord races that had been dealt a heavy blow in the past had to have an Overlord of an era among all the participants. Back then, the Blue Wave race had been one of the peak Overlord races in the universe. The reason why the human race had replaced the Blue Wave race was because of the existence of the first Divine King. The first Divine King was incomparably heaven-defying. According to current standards, he was at least an overlord of an era, which meant that his combat strength was above the 30th level. Relying on his invincible combat strength, the human race could practically disregard the foundations of the Blue Wave race and completely drive this ancient peak overlord race off their pedestal, turning them into ants. It could be said that if there was an epic overlord, then they could ignore the foundation of any pinnacle overlord race. However, from what Lu Feng knew, God Slayer didn't have any. Therefore, even though they had the strength to fight against all the other races, they couldn't do anything because those races had endless resources. Therefore, they chose to hide in silence. Lu Feng didn't have much doubts about the sovereign Immortal Lord's guess. After all, the Paragon Immortal Lord had no reason to lie to him. Hence, he really believed him. Gradually, an indescribably complicated expression appeared on Lu Feng's face. They have the unparalleled power of an epic overlord, the power that could topple all the pinnacle overlord races in the entire universe. However, they have always been hiding deeply. What kind of shocking scheme does this God Punisher have? What others schemed against was people, things, countries, and resources. The most powerful of them all were the scheming gods. However, this God Punisher was truly like its name. It was a force that could kill gods. However, this god was referring to the Divine King. God Punisher was scheming against the Divine King. This was truly an indescribable feeling of extreme fear and terror. Silence. The three of them were silent. In the next moment, the Paragon Immortal Lord sighed softly and said seriously, "No matter what, we have to face it. According to what you said, God Punisher is probably really plotting something huge. Before the final battle, before facing the ultimate calamity, the existence of the God Slayer had to be eradicated. Otherwise, with such uncertain factors, the future calamity will be extremely dangerous." After hearing Lu Feng's words, the Paragon Immortal Lord decided to eliminate this God Punisher force at all costs. Even if God Punisher didn't have any conflict with Lu Feng, he still had to eliminate it. After all, the final calamity was a calamity that concerned countless lives. It was a shocking final battle that would ensure the survival of countless lives. Therefore, he couldn't allow anything to happen. He couldn't allow any accidents to happen. Lu Feng nodded lightly. Now that he heard that there might be an overlord of an era hidden within God Punisher, he was extremely shocked and terrified. When I gather the three great origins and summon the complete Fudu, then I can open up a spacetime crack. At that time, my strength was already strong enough. Hence, when the time comes, I'll gather many beings and enter the primal universe together. Everything I'm waiting for is the arrival of the final calamity. After hearing Lu Feng's words, the Paragon Immortal Lord nodded solemnly. Like Lu Feng, he had already sensed the impending calamity. After the Emperor, the other four ultimate kings all chose to break through. They chose to advance forcefully. They must have sensed the arrival of the final calamity. Since even they have made breakthroughs, then we have to hurry. Otherwise, the future will be really dangerous. The three of them nodded lightly. According to the Paragon Immortal Lord's intention, Lu Feng should head directly to the other two Holy Lands and obtain the other two great origins. At the same time, he could refine his two great domains so that he could possess the combat power of the 33rd Ultimate Heaven. As for Lu Feng, he had naturally thought of this as well. He was also eager to return to the primal universe. However, in the end, he wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he chose to stay quietly in the Paragon Holy Land for a period of time. In fact, during this period of time, Lu Feng had no other choice. He was already a heavenly master and a heavenly immortal at the peak. His power was extremely powerful. If he encountered the Divine King who didn't use any of the Divine King's forbidden domains, then Lu Feng would have the power to contend with him. However, this kind of power was still not enough. Lu Feng knew that although he had activated two great domains, He was still a perfected flowing time immortal master, which was already very powerful. However, the power of his original body couldn't increase. This was still Lu Feng's weakness. If my original body also enters the Divine King realm, at that time, I will be able to open the 3 great forbidden domains, or even the 4 great forbidden domains. Then, will I really be able to break through the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level and become a true emperor? A true emperor was a great emperor who oversaw everything. He was a great emperor who looked down on all living beings. He was the greatest emperor who controlled all living beings. And such an emperor could only be accompanied by the supreme ruler's realm. Lu Feng really didn't dare to be sure. Once his original body also entered the Divine King's realm, would he really be able to shatter the 33rd ultimate heaven, complete the transformation of the forbidden domains, and become an invincible existence? Actually, whether it's the Immortal King or the Divine King, whether it's the Flowing Time Immortal Master or the Time Overlord, or even the Epoch Immortal Master and the Epoch Overlord, their original bodies all belong to the same realm as the Divine King. The real difference between the first, second, and third layers of the Divine King is the number of forbidden domains that they can activate. Strictly speaking, there's not much difference between their original bodies. Lu Feng was clear about this point. Now, he was also clear about it. A Flowing Time Overlord absolutely had the power to crush the Divine King. However, this crushing power could only be achieved after activating 2 of the Divine King's forbidden domains. If both of them didn't activate any Divine King's forbidden domains, then although the Flowing Time Overlord could still defeat the Divine King, it definitely wouldn't be a crushing defeat. And when encountering those heaven-defying existences, they could even completely suppress the Flowing Time Overlord. Right now, I'm only a peak immortal. However, if the Divine King didn't enter the Divine King's forbidden domains, I would even have the power to contend against him. This is the reality. This is the real scene. It can be said that before I became a supreme god, I had already created 3 great mythological taboo domains. Then, after becoming the Divine King, I'll definitely be the strongest Divine King in history. Because then, I'll be the true Overlord of the Epoch. As long as he obtained the other 2 origins, the moment Lu Feng became the Divine King, he would directly become the Overlord of the Epoch. This was the heaven-defying aspect of Lu Feng. At that time, relying on his own Divine King's realm, Lu Feng even doubted if he really had the chance to break through or directly break through the power of the 33 layers of ultimate heaven and directly face the primogenitor of human kings. Therefore, even if I can't reach the Divine King's realm before I return, I still have to work hard. So now I have to accumulate to the perfect realm. Only then will I have the possibility of breaking through the next tribulation. Thinking of this, Lu Feng didn't hesitate anymore. He directly summoned the power crystal from his body and used it all in an instant. He began to madly break through the perfect realm of the great apocalyptic evil body. This Lu Feng is really terrifying. His aptitude is terrifying, and his fortuitous encounters are equally shocking and unparalleled throughout the ages. However, what shocked me the most was his willpower. The sovereign immortal master looked at the soaring energy waves in Lu Feng's seclusion area and sighed slightly. Then, he spoke to the guide beside him. Hearing this, the guide nodded slightly. His eyes were filled with endless strangeness and complexity. In terms of opportunities, the 5 ultimate kings have experienced countless years. In each era, the greatest opportunities belong to them. It can be said that the marks of the era they have accumulated, the luck and bestowment of the era are incomparable to anyone else. Although Lu Feng has the Buddha, no matter how strong the Buddha is, it will not be of much help to one's cultivation. Moreover, I can feel that Buddha's existence didn't change Lu Feng. Instead, it was Lu Feng's existence that allowed Futu to see the hope of recovery. It was also because of this reason that it chose to enter Lu Feng's consciousness space and become one with Lu Feng's existence. All of this, and now that he has become a supreme existence, it is actually all because of Lu Feng himself. Moreover, the most terrifying aspect of him is his willpower. This has nothing to do with any opportunities bestowed upon him. Lu Feng, he really has an invincible willpower. Willpower, it really is willpower, it really is that invincible willpower. These people were incomparably familiar with the terror of the trial tower. In fact, it wasn't just the disciples who had entered the trial tower. Even the immortal masters had entered before. Back then, the sovereign immortal lord had once reached the 14th level, and that was already his limit. He naturally knew how much power, persistence and willpower were needed to walk through it. The 5 ultimate kings had stopped at the 16th level. Only the emperor had reached the 17th level. However, Lu Feng had done it. He was the only one who had reached the peak, the only one who had walked all the way to the end. Perhaps the Buddha believed that Lu Feng was an existence that could reach the 18th level, that he could obtain the 3 great essences and help him reach perfection. I'm afraid that only Lu Feng could reach the 18th level 3 times. Even the monarch had failed. Even the 4 ultimate kings had failed. Therefore, other than Lu Feng, no one else could do it. Therefore, Buddha's belief was not wrong. There was no mistake at all. Alright, let's wait. The current him has started the process of breaking through again. I really can't imagine what level he will reach before he stops. When he goes to the other 2 trial towers and obtains the other complete Buddha's origins, then he will definitely be extremely terrifying. Moreover, at that time, his combat strength will be unparalleled. He won't be any weaker than the emperor who has achieved great success. In the future, I hope that in the future, he can really reach that level and protect billions of lives. Chapter 925. The only person they could rely on in the future was Lu Feng. The 2 immortal masters knew this. They understood that in such a calamity, other than Lu Feng, no one else would be able to carry the banner of this era. Lu Feng sat quietly in his room. After using countless powers, he had finally reached perfection and completely entered the realm of perfection. Without a doubt, such a scene was extremely shocking. Of course, it wasn't the speed of Lu Feng's improvement that was shocking, but his slow progress. Indeed, after absorbing such a huge amount of power, if it were any other existence, they would have entered the legendary realm by now. Even an immortal king existence would be able to break through and become the flowing time, immortal venerable. However, for Lu Fenglai, this only allowed him to accumulate power to the level of perfection. Now I have entered the realm of perfection, and the 5th level of the great apocalyptic demon body is complete. It's time to enter there and see the truth of everything. Lu Feng had been incomparably calm before, as if millions of changes couldn't shake him in the slightest. In fact, this was indeed the case. In his previous peak state, he had even stepped into the realm of perfection of the flowing time Overlord. At that time, he could kill the Divine King as easily as killing a chicken. One had to know that the Supreme Divine King of the universe was an insurmountable gap in Lu Feng's heart. Therefore, after experiencing such a transformation, Lu Feng's heart had completely changed. He really didn't care about anything anymore. Feeling his own perfection, Lu Feng was calm. He felt that once he broke through, he was still calm. Moreover, Lu Feng also knew that after he entered the realm of the Divine King, his power would increase and become stronger. In fact, Lu Feng had an inexplicable feeling that after his original body became the Divine King, he might even have the possibility of challenging the human king ancestor. However, even though there were so many exciting changes, Lu Feng was still as calm as ever. There wasn't even the slightest bit of turbulence. However, at this moment, when he thought of what he was thinking, he was shaken. The excitement in his eyes could be seen clearly by anyone, because what Lu Feng wanted to see was a shocking secret of the primordial immortal devil era. Lu Feng took a deep breath and calmed himself down. Then, he closed his eyes and entered his own mental space. Everything around him was still the same. Nothing had changed. But at this moment, these things were different in Lu Feng's eyes. They were completely different. It wasn't just because he had opened the 5th level of the Great Devil True Body that had changed everything. More importantly, it was because the feeling here was completely different from before. Once upon a time, Lu Feng felt that this place was like a celestial cloud on the horizon, something he could only look at but not reach. However, it was different now. That was because, in Lu Feng's eyes, this place was filled with a completely new feeling, a feeling of reality. However, after it was filled with reality, it made Lu Feng feel even scarier. Lu Feng only felt a kind of excitement and happiness about this change. He knew that all these changes were caused by the 1/3 of Fuda's origin source he had obtained. If it hadn't been for that 1/3 of Fuda's origin source, this place definitely wouldn't have changed like this. Just wait. It won't take long. It really won't take long. Once I obtain the entire origin source, heavenly connecting Fudu, you will reappear in history and become the greatest flash and the greatest peerless existence of this era. According to the information he had obtained and his speculations, the remaining 2/3 of origin source should be in the other 2 Holy Lands, on the 18th level of the Trial Pagoda. He had to go there and obtain everything. With a light step, he crossed an endless space and time zone. Lu Feng appeared in front of the main entrance of the Futu Pagoda. As he gazed at the dazzling Futu Pagoda, Lu Feng felt a sense of familiarity. A moment later, he entered it. Everything was the same as before. Lu Feng continued on his way and finally arrived at the 3rd level. This was the 3rd level that contained memories. The 8 great supreme rulers were all the greatest existences in history. They were supreme beings who were invincible in the current era and history and had become the greatest existences recorded in the annals of history. All the conscription had been completed. Everyone had appeared between the heavens and the earth, within the 8 great saint lands. They were waiting quietly for the orders of the 8 great supreme rulers. Although Lu Feng had already seen the countless living beings before, he was still shocked to the core when he saw them again. He was so shocked that his soul was trembling. This was because everything that had happened before his eyes had truly shocked him to the core. Once upon a time, the virtual king had been an almighty. He had been the greatest terror among the various pinnacle overlords. He had been as proud and powerful as a progenitor. However, the virtual king was nothing here. Nothing at all. There were 100 billion immortals among them. 100 billion immortals, all of them primitive immortals. Every one of them was a terrifying powerhouse on the level of the virtual king. When 100 billion immortals gathered, the aura was indescribable. This is the primitive immortal demonic era. The human race is known as the pinnacle overlord race of the universe. We are the truly powerful pinnacle overlord race with unlimited power. However, it is a dream for us to gather 100 million immortals. However, there are 100 million virtual kings here. Lu Feng did not know if there were 100 billion virtual king powerhouses in history. Of course, this was not what shocked Lu Feng the most. Compared to the others, 100 billion virtual king was nothing. Once upon a time, in the history of the primitive universe, there were some great eras. Although they did not have the birth of epical overlords and could not leave their names in the universe era, their glory was remembered by future generations. Among them, there was an era where, in order to resist the final great calamity of the universe, they formed a supreme army that shook the universe. The supreme army was a legend. In the countless eras of the universe, it was the most shocking legend. In that era there had been a few hundred divine kings. The combination of these few hundred divine kings, together with the same standard armor, was enough to threaten anyone. In the past, Lu Feng had also been shocked by the existence of the sovereign army. However, from the looks of it, the so-called sovereign army was really a joke. A complete and utter joke. Actually, in the eyes of the primitive immortal demonic era, the later eras were all joke. What they possessed was far from what any other era could compare to. This is the true condensation of the great eras. The scene stopped abruptly at this point. Lu Feng knew that it was time to enter the 5th level and view the final memories. Without any hesitation, he entered the 5th level. Lu Feng was extremely excited as he looked at the sacred remains stone pillar. However, he quickly calmed down. Lu Feng did not hesitate. He stretched out his arm and gently placed it on the sacred remains stone pillar before him. The 8 supreme rulers had conscripted countless existences. Their eyes were solemn as an invincible aura was born. Even though they were separated by a great distance, their gazes were slightly similar. Then, they all nodded at the same time. A moment later, one of the sovereigns gently raised his arm, and in that instant, countless entities were shaken. That kind of soaring aura rose from the ground and sublimated eras. It made time collapse. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with an indescribable haze as he watched them set off. This should be the peak of the primitive, immortal demonic era. This must be the most glorious era of the primitive, immortal demonic era. I don't know if they can win. I don't know if they can truly defeat all of their enemies in the future. In fact, Lu Feng already knew the outcome. After all, the primitive immortal demonic era had finally died out and become a legend that was forever engraved in the minds of countless people. As for the primitive immortals, there were no more. Apart from the final kings of the 5 great eras, there were no other living beings left. But those demonic creatures that opposed the primitive immortals, at least they still existed in this era. This already explained the result. In the previous expedition, only experts at the level of the Divine King and above had participated. However, this time, 100 billion immortals had appeared. They were all virtual kings. They were going to take revenge for the humiliation of the past. This is the ultimate massacre of the primitive, immortal demonic era. Back then, the demonic creatures were able to collapse the army of the primitive, immortal demonic era because they relied on numbers. The number of demonic creatures back then had been too frightening. This time, in order to deal with their numbers, the 8 sovereigns of the primitive immortal demonic era had directly mobilized all the primitive immortals. Relying on the existence of the virtual kings, killing countless demonic creatures would be a piece of cake. As an invincible sovereign waved his arm, an ancient continent appeared in an instant. Lu Feng took a deep breath when he saw the continent. This continent was really incomparably vast. It was comparable to a super-life galaxy. This was also the primitive, immortal demonic era. If this had been his era, no one would have been able to create such a heaven-defying continent and use it as a warship. A warship. This was indeed a warship. It was the greatest expedition warship. Countless immortals and divine king experts entered the continent. The continent began to move rapidly. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with complex emotions as he watched it move. He knew that far, far away there was a seal, and that seal was the Pandora's box. Chapter 926. That was the land of Pandora, a place filled with destruction and countless demonic creatures. However, the many immortal venerables were filled with a strong desire to kill. In the past, they had suffered the most terrifying loss in history. Even their primitive immortal lord, the first supreme existence to become an unparalleled sovereign, had fallen. Aside from the sovereign lord himself, only a tenth of the God King paragons had ever returned from millions of battles. They couldn't find words to describe the losses they had suffered. They had gone completely crazy. Now, after countless years of suffering, they had finally recovered and were far stronger than they had been in the past. They had truly entered an unprecedented level. 8 sovereigns, 50 million divine king, 100 billion virtual king expert. This lineup had shocked countless eras. It was the most terrifying lineup in all of history. Therefore, even though they knew the future, even though they knew they would face endless death, they still didn't give up. They still chose to go on an expedition. The glory of the primitive immortal devil era cannot be tarnished. Obviously, they have already decided, even if it means giving up everything, they will go on a crusade and restore their former glory. Lu Feng had seen through it all. These powerful existences had seen through it all. In order to wash away the humiliation of the past, they had forgotten everything. They had forgotten everything. Finally, the countless existences arrived at the endless chaos. They arrived at the region where the primordial immortal Lord had turned into an eternal incarnation and suppressed it. Looking at the illusory seal in front of them, the 8 sovereigns smiled. It was a kind of nostalgia, a kind of terrifying smile. They had finally come here, bringing with them the regret and hatred of the primitive, immortal Lord. The 8 immortal lords waved their hands gently. In an instant, the terrifying seal that had sealed countless demonic creatures vanished completely. There was no trace left. In that instant, Lu Feng could clearly feel the majestic aura, the terrifying will rising. He knew that the primitive immortals had been waiting for this day for far, far too long. For the sake of their former glory, for the sake of restoring their former glory, they had truly decided to stake everything on this one throw. In the distance, there was still eternal darkness in the endless seal. Lu Feng still couldn't see anything. As for the demonic creatures, not a single one had appeared for a long time. However, just as Lu Feng was feeling slightly puzzled, something finally walked out of the sealed land. It was the existence of the first demonic creature. The moment they saw the monsters, countless existences were shaken. They were completely shaken. Many existences in the primordial immortal devil era had the deepest hatred for the demonic creatures. These people all knew that if the primitive immortal Lord hadn't appeared, relying on his own existence and burning everything, then there wouldn't have been a future, they wouldn't have existed at all. At that time, the primordial immortal devil age had already been annihilated and completely disappeared. Therefore, many existences hated this demonic creature. It was a great hatred born from the depths of their hearts that could never be erased. At this moment, when they saw the thing that made them so angry again, they could no longer suppress the shocking hatred in their hearts. They had already attacked, without any hesitation, in the blink of an eye. The demonic creature disappeared completely, leaving not even the slightest trace behind. In fact, all of this was expected. After all, the demonic creature that appeared wasn't a powerful one at all. It was just a very simple demonic creature that hadn't even reached the true immortal realm. Such a weak demonic creature, let alone a divine king, even an ordinary primitive immortal would be able to easily crush it countless times. Therefore, its fall and disappearance were completely within reason. However, everyone revealed a serious expression at this moment, because they knew that after the appearance of the first demonic creature, the second, the third, and even countless other demonic creatures would appear. Perhaps they had already carefully studied it. Following their common thoughts, in the void, in that space-time crack, countless demonic creatures appeared, countless shocking demonic creatures. They all appeared like a geyser. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a strange look. He could feel that the demonic creatures that appeared this time were really powerful, really terrifyingly powerful. There were many of them, and in terms of strength they were much, much stronger. However, the immortal kings of the primordial immortal devil age didn't seem to see this. Or perhaps they saw it, but they didn't react at all. They just watched, quietly watching. At this moment, the 100 billion immortals were shaken. Their role in this expedition was to destroy these low-level demonic creatures. Therefore, now was the time for them to show their true usefulness. Countless demonic creatures disappeared, and continued to disappear. However, the demonic creatures that appeared later on were even more terrifying, and their numbers were even greater. This time, many of the primordial immortals were shaken. In the past, only a small portion of them took action because they really didn't have a reason to. But now it was the same. Because the number of demonic creatures now was large enough, it was worth it for them to concentrate on fighting against them. The commotion of 100 billion immortal kings was undoubtedly shocking. With just a thought, the gathered power destroyed everything, completely annihilating the demonic creatures that appeared. At this moment, countless existences seemed to heave a sigh of relief, and their expressions relaxed slightly. The existences that appeared here had never participated in any expeditions before. In the legends they had heard, these demonic creatures were absolutely terrifying existences of destruction. Therefore, they risked their lives and did all they could to have the power to fight against these demonic creatures. However, at this moment, after the first battle, they realized that everything was so simple. Although the demonic creatures were terrifying, the extent of their terror was extremely limited, and they couldn't threaten their existences. However, after seeing the relaxed expressions of these existences, a supreme ruler finally spoke, as if he had said something. After hearing his words, all of them were silent. Countless existences were silent, and in the end, they lowered their heads deeply. Lu Feng knew that this invincible supreme ruler must have reprimanded them. Indeed, although they had not experienced the final battle, the 8 unparalleled sovereigns had all received the inheritance of the primitive immortal lord. They had each received an eighth of the origin source power and an eighth of the memories. It could be said that they were the ones who understood the terror of these demonic creatures best. Sure enough, after hearing the supreme ruler's reprimand, all of them fell silent for a moment, then nodded gently. They didn't have time to think, because the demonic creatures that appeared in this sealed land reappeared. This time, there was an incomparably terrifying number of them. Seeing the countless demonic creatures, Lu Feng even felt a little doubtful. He even suspected that all the demonic creatures in this sealed land had appeared. Of course, this was just Lu Feng's random thought, because he knew that it was impossible. This was because the demonic creatures that had appeared at this moment were definitely not all of the demonic creatures. This was because none of the demonic creatures that had appeared this time were at the pinnacle. This made Lu Feng understand that these demonic creatures were actually cannon fodder, used to exhaust the enemy's strength. Since they were cannon fodder, they naturally wouldn't let these powerful existences take action. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, the immortal kings, who were also existences at the level of the divine king, hadn't taken action. They watched as the countless immortals fought against the demonic creatures, constantly killing their opponents and being killed by their opponent. It could be said that these immortal kings were really hesitant. They all understood that once they took action, it would be a crazy victory that would be as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. However, it was obvious that these demonic creatures still hadn't allowed the pinnacle existences to appear. Therefore, they could only remain silent and not take action. Looking at these demonic creatures, Lu Feng sighed slightly, his eyes filled with an incomparably strange color. As expected, it's not just the immortals who are improving. Even these demonic creatures are still improving at a crazy rate. In the past, the number of demonic creatures was already at its peak. But now, such a large number of demonic creatures were merely cannon fodder. This is enough to show that the demonic creature's speed of development is no less than the primitive immortal devil era. On the battlefield, countless people had fallen, countless monsters had been destroyed, and countless people had died. Many demonic creatures had disappeared one after another, but at the same time, countless immortals had completely disappeared, becoming an eternal thing of the past. However, seeing this incomparably tragic scene, those immortal kings still didn't take action. They had been suppressing their fighting spirit from beginning to end, waiting quietly for the moment when they were needed. These immortals are actually all of the same race, and there's no incomparably strict hierarchy between them like in the later generations. It can be said that whether it's the immortals at the level of the virtual king or the divine king, there's actually an incomparably harmonious relationship between them. This was something that Lu Feng could clearly see from the way these living beings lived. But because he saw it, Lu Feng could feel and understand the feelings between these people. He could understand the pain in the hearts of these divine king immortals as they watched the virtual king immortals perish one after another. In fact, they have too many things that they have no choice. These immortals at the level of the divine king immortals truly had too many things that they had no choice in. They also wanted to take action, and they also wanted to protect what they had to protect. But they couldn't because now wasn't the time. It wasn't time for them to take action yet. Therefore, no matter how much resentment and unwillingness they had in their hearts, they still couldn't and wouldn't take action. The only thing they could do was endure, and endure unceasingly. But this kind of patience didn't last long. Because after this incomparably large number of demonic creatures had been annihilated, a demonic creature that needed them to take action finally walked out of the space-time rift. Chapter 9:27. The demonic creatures weren't just the simplest of ordinary demonic creatures. If that were the case, then the million-strong Divine King army wouldn't have failed so miserably. The true cause of their failure was the peak demonic creatures, those powerful demonic creatures. They weren't afraid of anything, and they were filled with the power of decay. They were almost impossible to kill. Although they weren't completely invincible among those of the same level, they were still unimaginably powerful. It was because of these peak demonic creatures that the immortal army of the past had suffered from countless existences. Now they had appeared once more, and they had come to this world once more. Lu Feng was silent, quietly watching the countless demonic creatures and the 50 million Supreme Divine King that had finally been completely shaken. 50 million Supreme God Kings were all stirred up. The might that was brought about was indescribable. Such a shocking scene was a little too terrifying to be described with words. In an instant, the entire universe seemed to be trembling. The endless chaotic void was completely annihilated and disappeared after coming into contact with this terrifying power. There was no doubt that this was a frightening scene. There was no doubt that the first wave of demonic beasts had completely disappeared in an instant. Although the demonic creatures were also powerful and had improved, compared to the immortal race's accumulation and crazy progress over the years, they were still a little lacking. There was still a slight gap. Therefore, under the immortal race's crazy and terrifying slaughter, the demonic creatures quickly disappeared and were annihilated. After everything was done, the 50 million Divine King experts didn't show any signs of being shaken. At this moment, they were all looking in the same direction, an incomparably blurry and hazy direction. As they looked in that direction, everyone else also looked in the same direction. Lu Feng also looked in that direction, but all he saw was confusion. Nothing existed, and it did not appear. At this moment, a slightly puzzled look appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng really didn't know what these people were doing. This was because apart from the 100 billion immortals and the 50 million Divine King experts, all other existences were looking in that direction. This included the Overlords and the dozens of Overlords who had reached the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level. Of course, just these people alone wouldn't make Lu Feng feel anything. What truly shocked and puzzled him were the 8 Supreme Sovereigns. They had actually chosen the same path, and were looking at the same path as him. Lu Feng was silent. He didn't know anything. He observed quietly. Lu Feng thought that something would be born there, and many immortals knew about it. But in the end, there was still nothing. And Lu Feng was sure that there was really nothing there. There was nothing at all. Finally, after waiting for a long time, the countless immortal race beings made their move at the same time. They were truly on the move. They seemed to have received some kind of order. Finally, they stopped waiting and hesitated. Instead, they moved slowly in a certain direction. Looking in the direction they were moving, Lu Feng breathed a sigh of relief. There was an indescribable strange look in his eyes. There were too many things in it. Most of all, there was a kind of excitement. The immortals were moving in the direction of the place where the demonic creature was sealed. Pandora, this is definitely a Pandora's box. But in addition to the disaster, this box should also contain something that makes countless living beings go crazy. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been that expedition or this expedition during the primordial immortal demonic era. Lu Feng knew that there must be something that made countless existences go crazy over it. If that wasn't the case, they might have taken revenge and chosen to go on another expedition for the glory of the past. But this definitely wouldn't make the entire immortal race go crazy. There must be something within this that caused the entire immortal clan to go crazy over it. If that wasn't the case, they definitely wouldn't have gone crazy. Time passed slowly as countless existences surged into the opened seal. Lu Feng's gaze also gradually followed them into the seal. Lu Feng was also very curious about the place where the seal was located. Now, he could vaguely sense it and completely understand it. The root cause of the primordial immortal demonic era's destruction was probably directly related to these demonic creatures. It was even possible that these demonic creatures directly destroyed the primordial immortal demonic era. This was the nest of the demonic creatures. It was the place where they were born. It was also the place that made countless immortals and demons go crazy. This place could really be called the place where the universe's most shocking secrets existed. Therefore, Lu Feng was very eager to enter and see the truth. Time continued to pass. Countless existences began to enter slowly. One after another, they entered the sealed space. Finally, when the last Divine King expert disappeared, Lu Feng realized that everything in front of him had changed completely. This place had changed into a new scene. In this new scene, there were 100 billion immortals and 50 million Divine King existences. They all stood there quietly, observing everything around them. At this moment, Lu Feng finally saw his surroundings. He saw everything around him. However, everything in front of him made Lu Feng feel extremely strange. Lu Feng felt that this place was filled with the aura of decay. Then, it shouldn't be an abnormally terrifying and desolate place. At the very least, it should be filled with the aura of decay. It should be a country of death. However, what Lu Feng saw was very different from what he had imagined. There was no sense of death in this place. In fact, this place was more like a pure land of immortals. Among them, Lu Feng even saw countless godly objects that were filled with spirituality. These godly objects were never seen in the original universe. However, they were filled with spirituality and had an indescribable sense of wonder. What terrifying godly objects! What a strange place! These godly objects are all incomparably precious. Even the trashiest one among them is at the 6th grade level. The number of godly objects here is really too terrifying. It could be said that even in the vast area of the original immortal demon continent, there wasn't such a huge number of godly objects. This place could really be said to be everywhere. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He was shocked, and so were the other immortals who had entered this place. The eyes of the 8 supreme rulers were filled with strange expressions. They seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, the 8 supreme rulers came to an agreement. Out of the 100 billion immortals, 10 billion immortals walked out. In the end, these 10 billion immortals stayed here. The other 90 billion immortals and the remaining 50 million Divine King powerhouses continued to move forward. There was really no danger here. It wasn't like the chaotic and primitive immortal demon continent of the past, which was filled with countless dangers and required the Divine King to stabilize everything. Therefore, there wasn't a single Divine King powerhouse left in this great army. Countless immortals seemed to have decided on a direction after being transmitted by the 8 supreme rulers. Their footsteps were firm as they walked in the same direction. This place, this sealed space, was really too big. In Lu Feng's opinion, this place wasn't any worse than the original immortal demon continent. Without a doubt, this was extremely shocking. Lu Feng was shocked. What a mysterious place. Is this Pandora's box or the pure land of bliss? Such a vast place filled with countless godly objects was undoubtedly a true pure land. With this place, the immortals could definitely develop. They could develop explosively once again. 10 billion immortals is enough. It's really enough. With them, they will be able to develop rapidly in this new holy land. It's not impossible for many Divine King powerhouses to be born among these 10 billion immortals. This place could be said to be a base for the immortals. A base that could continue to develop and grow stronger. After traveling for an unknown amount of time, Lu Feng saw countless godly objects. Among them, there were even some grade 9 godly objects. These grade 9 godly objects weren't wasted. Whenever they were spotted, the Divine King powerhouses would take action and directly collect them. Just like that, countless immortals continued to advance and collect. Finally, after waiting for an unknown amount of time, they had arrived. They had finally arrived at their destination. Lu Feng took a deep breath as he looked at everything in front of him. At this moment, he finally came to a realization and understood. It turns out that those demonic creatures didn't disappear. They weren't completely annihilated either. Instead, they are here. The scene in front of him really matched the image in Lu Feng's mind. It matched the image of endless death. There were countless places of decay and death in this place. All that poured out was death, darkness, and destruction. It could be said that the existence of this place really caused countless living beings to fall and be annihilated. In this place of decay were the demonic creatures that Lu Feng had been wondering why he couldn't see them all this time. Seeing the existence of these demonic creatures, Lu Feng took a deep breath. There was a strange turbulence in his eyes. It seems like an earth-shattering war is about to happen. But these demonic creatures shouldn't be able to stop the immortals. There were countless demonic creatures here. The number of low-level, high-level, and peak-level demonic creatures was terrifying. It was comparable to the number of demonic creatures that were annihilated by the immortals' army. But this shouldn't be. Because back then, so many demonic creatures were annihilated by the immortals in an instant. And these demonic creatures couldn't withstand a round of attack from the immortals. They were about to be annihilated in an instant. In the past, the demonic creatures were so heaven-defying that they completely suppressed the immortals. The primitive immortal lord had to sublimate himself and pay the price of his life to seal the exit of those demonic creatures. And after countless years of development, these demonic creatures only existed in such a small number. Lu Feng didn't want to believe this at all. However, he didn't want to believe that this was the reality. Under the joint attack of countless experts of the primordial immortal devil era, the demonic creatures that filled the sky were annihilated in an instant and turned into ashes. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng fell silent. Everything was within his expectations. However, it was precisely because everything was within Lu Feng's expectations that he felt that something was very wrong. Something was very wrong. After all, the demonic creatures back then were so terrifying that they couldn't be defeated. But now they were really too weak. Although there are also Overlord-level existences among the demonic creatures that were wiped out this time, they are still too weak. But compared to the demonic creatures that annihilated the primitive immortal devil-era army for the first time, their numbers are still lacking. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be like this. Lu Feng frowned slightly. He knew that everything shouldn't be like this. the demonic beasts were ferocious in the past. Moreover, looking at the number of low-level demonic beasts, Lu Feng understood that these demonic beasts must have developed. Moreover, they must have undergone a lot of development just like the immortals, but this time the victory was too easy. But soon, Lu Feng came to a complete understanding of the situation. After those demonic creatures were completely annihilated, a few overlords took action and used the heaven and earth arm to restore the ground that was decayed by the demonic creatures. However, the restoration speed was still too slow. Then, many divine king existences took action at the same time. They began to transform the decayed ground and began the most terrifying transformation process. Fast, really fast. 50 million divine king experts took action at the same time and completely transformed countless decayed ground in a short time. However, it was a pity that the area of decay was simply too large. Even with 50 million divine king experts taking action at the same time, they still couldn't complete the transformation in a short time. Therefore, the transformation process continued. Time continued to pass, and things continued to change. Very quickly, 10 years had passed, and more than half of the remodeling process had been completed. Chapter 928. It had been a full 100 years since the immortal and demon armies had set out on this expedition. In the past 100 years, they spent most of their time in the process of searching for demonic creatures. Here, Lu Feng could feel the passage of time, but all the changes in his heart and eyes seemed to have happened in an extremely short period of time. Lu Feng really didn't feel bored at all. Another 10 years had passed. After 10 years, the transformation of everything in this sealed land had been completed. When he saw the final place, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with an indescribable glint. This was because there was actually an ancient transportation array at the very center of this land of decay. It was an indescribably huge transportation array with a radius of more than 10 million miles. Even if 90 billion immortals and 50 million divine king entered at the same time, it wouldn't be crowded at all. Of course, Lu Feng also doubted whether this transportation array could really transport such a huge number of existences at once. However, Lu Feng quickly understood that he was overthinking things, because in the next moment, all of these immortal race beings had entered the teleportation array. Soon after, the 8 supreme rulers all showed up. They used the invincible might of the supreme rulers to activate the teleportation formation and teleport the countless existences away. Looking at everything in front of him, Lu Feng was silent. He was completely silent. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have understood something. In front of him was an immortal sacred land, a place filled with countless divine objects and immortal realms. The environment here was even more beautiful and gorgeous than the sacred land he had just visited. The spiritual qi was also more abundant. Lu Feng vaguely understood something after seeing all this. A strange look appeared in his eyes. So this is where it is. This should be the place. It should be the final destination of the many immortal clans in the legends. This should be the final destination of the 33 layers of heaven. Lu Feng was not an idiot. There were some things that he could easily guess. Among the countless places he had seen or heard of in his memories, only the legendary final destination fit this description. And the existence of the final destination was indeed the ultimate goal of all living beings in the primitive immortal devil era. What I just entered was the first heaven. Obviously, I'm in the second heaven now. 33 heavens, 33 supreme holy lands, 33 eternal spaces. The existence of each level was a more dazzling and rich region, a region that could support countless living beings. The higher the level of the sky, the larger the space. Once we reach the 33rd heaven, it will be a whole new universe. In the past, Lu Feng really didn't believe these words when the Paragon Immortal Lord explained it to him. It could even be said that he disdained it. However, things were different now because Lu Feng had really seen it. Although he didn't know if the last level was really equivalent to another universe, he knew that the 33 levels of heaven were really a supreme sacred ground. Although he didn't know if the last level was equivalent to another universe, he knew that the 33 levels of heaven were really a supreme sacred ground. No wonder this place was the ultimate goal of the entire immortal devil era. No wonder they wanted to conquer this place even though they knew that there were countless demonic creatures here. The second heaven was the same as the first heaven. It was also a land of immortal essence, without any signs of decay. After waiting here for a while, another 10 billion immortals stayed here and started to reproduce and develop. The other existences followed closely behind the 50 million divine king experts and continued their endless conquest. Time passed slowly. This time, it took close to 300 years just to find the central area. This time was nearly 4 times longer than the first time. Finally, a familiar scene appeared again. In the central area, Lu Feng once again saw the decaying land and countless demonic creatures. This time, there were more demonic creatures, and they were even more powerful. But obviously, they were still no match for the current immortals. In an instant, 50 million divine king experts attacked at the same time and annihilated all the demonic creatures. At this time, Lu Feng gradually understood something. He finally cleared up the confusion he had in the past. So it's not because these demonic creatures have weakened. It's because these demonic creatures are stationed on every level and are trying their best to transform everything on that level into a decaying land suitable for them to live in. This was the reason why there were so few demonic creatures. After annihilating the demonic creatures, the 50 million divine king experts attacked again. Using a shocking amount of power, they started the craziest transformation process. Compared to the last time, the remodeling process obviously took a lot more time. By the time the transformation was completed, nearly 100 years had passed. If the upper level is really as Sovereign Immortal Lord said, and it's getting bigger and bigger, to the point that the final 33 heavens is a huge Holy Land immortal domain comparable to the original universe, then the transformation and conquest of the final level will take countless years. Up until now, 500 years had passed. The second level took 4 times more time than the first level. This was enough to show how big this place was. After the changes were completed, the teleportation array appeared. This time, the teleportation array was much bigger than the one on the first floor. The first level's transmission array could already accommodate the transmission of countless beings. Now, with this bigger transmission array and the 10 billion fewer beings here, the transmission would be even less of a problem. Soon, the 8 supreme rulers used their invincible power again to transmit the 80 billion immortals and 50 million divine king experts away. In fact, the transmission of these beings didn't require the help of the 8 supreme rulers. However, if he relied on himself to teleport, then the speed of teleportation would be different. This was unacceptable. After all, no one knew what kind of beings they would encounter on the next level. Therefore, even if the supreme rulers had to do it, they had to be transmitted together. The scene changed, and changed again. This time, it was only the concentration of spirit chi and the surrounding environment that changed. The third level of the 33 levels of heaven. This should be the third level. Looking at everything around him, Lu Feng was certain that this was the legendary 33 levels of heaven. Soon, after entering this place, the immortal race once again sent out 10 billion immortals. Then, the other beings began the process of conquering. One had to admit that although the Sovereign Immortal Lord's words might not be very accurate, some things were generally the same. At least, the third level was more than 10 times bigger than the second level. They spent another 2,000 years searching for it. Finally, after 2,000 years, the immortal race's conquering army once again arrived at the decaying area. Lu Feng's eyes were slightly strange. He already understood many things in his heart. So, it's actually like this, The real situation is actually like this. Lu Feng came to a realization. It seems like the real gathering place of these demonic beings should be in the sky, in a higher level. The further down we go, the fewer of them there are. Lu Feng could clearly feel it. In these 3 levels, the area of the decaying area was getting bigger and bigger. Of course, after all, the area of each level was getting bigger and bigger. But the increase in the decaying area was obviously much greater than the increase in area. With each level, the area of the decaying land increased in proportion and became larger and larger. This point made Lu Feng gradually come to a realization in his heart. The demonic beings on this level are really strong. But it's a pity that this is not enough to stop the immortal race's conquering army. The conquering army of the immortal race was really terrifying. 50 million Divine King. This was enough to make those who vowed to surpass the primordial immortal devil era feel ashamed. Of course, that wasn't all. The most shocking thing here was the existence of the peak expert. There were really too many experts in the primordial immortal devil era. Any one of them could achieve great feats and leave their name in the history of their era. Just the number of epic overlords had surpassed 10,000 sovereigns after a few years of continuous battles. This was an indescribably terrifying lineup. Of course, not all of these epic overlords were at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Most of them were at the 30th level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Those who could reach the 31st level of the ultimate sky could be counted on one hand. As for the 32nd level of the ultimate sky, they were even rarer. As for the fighting strength of the 33rd level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level, it was pitifully few. There were only a few dozen of them. Moreover, it was obvious that most of them had just stepped into the 33rd level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Their fighting strength had not completely entered the quasi-invincible realm. Until now, these terrifying existences have not made a move. If I want to know the fighting strength of the 33rd level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level, I'll have to wait until the next few levels. To be honest, Lu Feng really wanted to know how terrifying the fighting strength of the 33rd level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level was as soon as possible. After all, he was also in existence who wanted to break through the 33rd level of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Chapter 929. It won't be long. I believe that the most powerful existence will make a move soon. This time, Lu Feng was wrong. He thought that there would be a demonic being on the 10th level that could shake an epic overlord. He wasn't wrong about that. An epic overlord-level demonic being had indeed appeared on the 11th level. Unfortunately, the foundation of the immortal race was even more terrifying. Over the endless years, in addition to their continuous cultivation and development, they had also condensed countless powerful formations. Once these formations were combined, the power produced would be incomparably terrifying. 50 million Divine King existences had condensed several terrifying formations. The power produced this time was indescribably terrifying. 100 Divine King formations together were enough to annihilate a perfect epic overlord. This was unimaginable. After all, a perfect epic overlord could easily suppress hundreds of Divine King Supremes. It was because of the existence and assistance of these magical formations that the top existences of the immortal race were able to smoothly reach the 15th level without having to make a move. At this moment, there were no existences below the immortal king realm around. Those who could reach this level were all Divine King existences who had once conquered 50 million Divine Kings. After going through countless battles, they had become much stronger. Although it wasn't to an unimaginable extent, the degree of improvement was clearly visible. Just the 15th level alone is already as big as the Yellow Spring continent by a few hundred or even 1,000 times. This area was thousands of times larger than the Yellow Springs continent under Lu Feng's feet, or even more. Moreover, this was only the 15th level. After all, there were still 18 levels to go. Conquering, resisting, and transforming this level took nearly 100,000 years. How much more time will it take to reach the last few levels? After a moment of silence, Lu Feng sighed softly. Now, it had already taken more than 200,000 years. This was much, much longer than the history of the human race. He knew that these immortals basically had an unlimited lifespan. After all, they had sufficient pills that could extend their lifespans indefinitely. This was even more true for the Divine King powerhouses. But 200,000 years was too long. During this period, the 50 million primitive punitive Divine King existences not only became stronger, but also increased in number. In the lower realms, many of the 100 billion immortals who had been stationed there had broken through and entered the God King realm. These 33 heavens are truly worthy of being the ultimate destination of the immortal and devil era. As expected, the immortal race can develop best in this place. No wonder they are so crazy just to enter this place. Breakthroughs. They were all breakthroughs. And the number of breakthroughs was also increasing. About 10 million years had passed by the time they conquered the 19th level. During these 10 million years, they had lost many Divine King Supreme Beings. However, with the addition of new Divine King Supreme Beings from the lower levels, the number of 50 million didn't decrease. Instead, it increased by a lot. More than 100 million Divine King Supreme Beings, in Lu Feng's mind, even though he had become a time overlord comparable to a complete perfection boundary, a godly monarch supreme was still a legendary existence. It was an existence that only existed in legends. After all, back in the original universe, Lu Feng had only seen a handful of Divine King Supreme Beings. And among the human race, before the real body of the Divine King stabilizing chaos came out, there wasn't a single one. But now, in the original Immortal Devil era, the Divine King Supreme Beings were just some ordinary beings. They couldn't even be considered ordinary beings. In a real confrontation between the top, the Divine King Supreme Beings were just cannon fodder. A deep sigh. It was a real sigh. Lu Feng looked into the distance at the countless beings. His eyes flashed again. He could feel that the final transformation had been completed. 100 million Divine King Supreme Beings had been gathered, and the number of powerful Divine King Supreme Beings had increased by a lot compared to when they had set off. It could be said that although the number of Divine Kings in the immortal race had only doubled, their strength was more than 10 times stronger than before. This was really too exaggerated. Finally, after the complete transformation was completed, the expedition began once again. This time, they were finally going to enter the 20th level. After going through all this, Lu Feng could faintly feel that the changes after the 10th level were the greatest. It was as if the 10th level contained some great secret. Sure enough, everything changed completely on the 20th level. The area of the demonic decay was really frightening. It was almost half the size of the entire 20th level, and the battle had begun. It started in an instant and continued without stopping. Shocking battles kept appearing and colliding. Lu Feng saw countless ultimate killing moves of the Divine King Supreme Beings. These killing existences made Lu Feng gradually addicted. To be honest, although he could easily kill countless Divine King Supreme Beings after entering such a domain, Lu Feng's understanding of the Divine King's methods was still too little. Therefore, this was the best opportunity for him to learn. Hundreds of millions of Divine King Supreme Beings all had their own unique technique. Although Lu Feng couldn't memorize all of them, he could use some of them for reference. However, just a part of them was enough. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes shone with an astonishing light. Faintly, Lu Feng finally found his own martial Dao path. To be honest, his methods were really limited. Now, after seeing countless collisions, Lu Feng finally began to condense his own divine king Great Tao. The battle had gone on for tens of thousands of years. It was really tragic and incomparably tragic. Countless divine king supreme beings had fallen in the immortal race. Even many temporal overlords had fallen. During this period, the most shocking thing was the death of an epic overlord. This was what shocked Lu Feng the most. Of course, this endless tragedy wasn't just in exchange for the 20th level. It was also a kind of experience. After this battle, the number of supreme beings of the immortal race broke through again. Moreover, the number of powerhouses had increased by a lot. The overall level of strength had increased by a whole new level. This scene, the horror of the primitive immortal demon era, was deeply ingrained in Lu Feng's heart. This is the invincible power of the primitive immortal demon era. It's really terrifying. During the battle, they can grow rapidly and become those towering trees. For them, there's no obstacle at all. If they want to be great, there's no obstacle at all. Aptitude, they had it. It was absolutely shocking aptitude. They had also gained experience from fighting against these demonic creatures. As for the environment, the existence of the 33 levels of heaven was filled with boundless spiritual energy, making their environment incomparably good. It was even better than the primitive immortal demon continent. In terms of resources, it was even more so. Although the godly objects that appeared here were never seen before, their level was right there. It could be said that these godly objects had shocking uses and could help them improve at the fastest speed. All the factors to become a powerhouse were present. All the conditions were complete. It could be said that all the restrictions had disappeared. To become a powerhouse, it was really not difficult for them. It was really simple. The battle of the 20th level ended. Including the process of sweeping and modifying, it took a total of tens of millions of years. This level was really too big. Here, Lu Feng felt as though he was in the primitive universe. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood and believed the words of the sovereign immortal master. I'm really looking forward to seeing if the 33 levels of heaven is really as vast and terrifying as the primitive universe. The 20th level of heaven was already so terrifying and huge. What about the rest? Those would probably be incomparably shocking until the 25th level, the powerhouses of the immortal race's 33rd level of the ultimate heaven, did not make a move. Up until now, the number of powerhouses in the 33rd level of the ultimate heaven had reached 300. This number was definitely enough to sweep through anything. After all, the fighting power of the 33rd level of the ultimate heaven was known as the existence of a quasi-dominator. The only pity was that the number of the 8 supreme dominators had not changed. There were still 8 supreme dominators. This undoubtedly made many immortal race powerhouses sigh. It's a pity that the 8 supreme dominators that appeared in the later generations all received the inheritance of the primitive immortal master. That was how they finally entered the realm of the supreme dominators today. Apart from the 8 of them, no one else received the power of the origin. In the later generations, there was actually no one who could rely on their own efforts to become a supreme dominator. Lu Feng sighed deeply. His expression was one of worship. Yes, he worshipped. At this moment, Lu Feng was also slightly in awe. And the one he worshipped was his ancestor, human King Liu Bei. The 8 supreme dominators all relied on the inheritance of the primitive immortal master to achieve their current status. As for the 5 ultimate kings of the later generations, after reaching their peak, they were only comparable to the fighting power of the 33rd level of the ultimate heaven. They relied on the blessings of their eras, but they might not be able to become supreme dominators. But human king ancestor, at a wrong time, without any blessings or help, he broke all the taboos along the way and actually became a human king supreme dominator. His greatness is probably comparable to that of the primitive immortal master, or even surpassing him. Chapter 930. Compared to the human monarch, Lu Feng knew that he was still far from it. Apart from his own unparalleled efforts, the fact that he was able to reach his current level was inseparable from opportunities. Lu Feng also vaguely knew that he was hiding a shocking identity. Although he hadn't traveled through eras with the 5 ultimate monarchs, he had also obtained a lot, perhaps even more. But what about the human monarch? From beginning to end, the human monarch hadn't received any blessings. He was just a simple existence. He had risen from the weak, slowly grew stronger, and finally reached the pinnacle. One had to know that this pinnacle was the true supreme pinnacle. Lu Feng knew that in the past, the human monarch had already been regarded by those mighty existences as their successor, an existence that could replace them. The human monarch is the human monarch. Since ancient times, only the primitive immortal master could contend with him. The others are really too far away. Lu Feng sighed. Looking at everything before him, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. Apart from the supreme ruler, the entire immortal tribe was more than 10 times stronger. In terms of numbers, they had more than doubled. In terms of strength and cultivation realm, the number of powerhouses was much, much greater. However, because the supreme ruler hadn't appeared, the immortal tribe was in a slightly awkward position. However, it was clear that many existences didn't care about this point. Their conquest continued without end, the craziest and most terrifying conquest. Now that the position of the 20th level had been taken over entirely, the many beings of the immortal race were truly relieved. With a sacred place like the 20th level, it could be said that in the future powerhouses would be born endlessly. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about what would happen if the army in front of them ran into difficulties. The 20th level. The area of the 20th level is more than 100 times larger than the primitive, immortal demon continent. In addition to the divine items and spiritual chi, this is equivalent to increasing the number of immortal tribe existences by 100 times. Moreover, Lu Feng knew that the conquest wouldn't disappear. They would continue, because there were still the 21st level, the 22nd level, and the final 33 levels. As expected, after resting here for a while and waiting for more divine king powerhouses to appear from below, the immortal tribe's conquest army set out again. Time passed slowly. Before they knew it, 1 billion years had passed. 1 billion years was a very long time for many of the immortal race's powerhouses. Although some of the weaker divine kings had elixirs that could prolong their lives indefinitely, due to the previous collision and the presence of the demonic creature's decaying aura, they were unable to hold on any longer. In the end, they perished. After the appearance of the first divine king powerhouse, countless divine king powerhouses began the process of death. The Overlord of Time. Of course, with the existence of the first 24 levels, the immortal tribe's foundation was much, much stronger than before. Although the divine king powerhouses had perished, the replenishment they received was much, much greater. The punitive expedition army had reached an unprecedented number of 300 million. 300 million, 300 million God King experts. With such a lineup, they were truly powerful enough to face any kind of power head-on. From the moment they entered, the 8 supreme rulers hadn't made a move. Of course, they weren't the only ones. Even the overlords of the ultimate sky of the 33 levels hadn't made a move. With the help of the array and the cooperation of the countless divine king powerhouses, they didn't need to make a move. They could directly annihilate the demonic creatures that filled the sky. After experiencing the changes over the years, these people gradually grasped some of the characteristics of the demonic creatures. They naturally knew that although the demonic creatures were full of decay and seemed unsolvable, these immortals still vaguely knew some of the demonic creatures' weaknesses. By taking advantage of these weaknesses, the immortal tribe was able to launch the most powerful and terrifying attack. Time continued to pass. On the 24th level, the immortal tribe's lineup grew stronger again. They finally entered the 25th level again. The 25th level is almost at the end. I just don't know what exactly is on the 25th level and what kind of terrifying demonic creatures exist. An earth-shattering battle had already taken place on the 24th level. If the immortal tribe hadn't undergone the baptism and nurturing of these years, their overall strength would have increased by 100 times compared to when they had first entered. Apart from the supreme rulers, their overall strength would have increased by 100 times. Otherwise, this conquest would have ended in failure. Even though they were more than 100 times stronger, they still encountered unprecedented resistance when facing the demonic creatures on the 25th level. Just the duration of the battle alone was enough to last tens of millions of years. During these tens of millions of years, they had been constantly clashing, conquering, and resisting. Lu Feng understood that the stronger 26th level would definitely be an even more terrifying location. It was even possible that the Overlord of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level would also have to make a move there. The battle on the 26th level had lasted for over 30 million years. However, no one with the ultimate sky's combat strength had made a move. In order to repair and improve this level, it had taken a total of 900 million years. The immortal tribe had already experienced one. 9 billion years since they had arrived here. This was a desolate, long period of time that made people tremble in fear. No one had made a move on the 27th level. Another endless period of time. When he saw this, Lu Feng sighed endlessly. Although the demonic creatures on the 26th and 27th levels were much stronger and more numerous than before, the immortal tribe's development was still ongoing. However, the development of the immortals was also ongoing. Their increase in numbers far exceeded the increase in the number of demonic creatures. Therefore, no ultimate sky powerhouse had made a move. Finally, after spending nearly 17 billion years here, when the number of immortal powerhouses reached an unprecedented 600 million, they entered the 30th level. The 30th level was about to enter the final level. This was a level of change in itself. As expected, the chaos here was beyond anyone's imagination and understanding. At this moment, the land of decay had occupied almost the entire area. It could be said that from the moment they entered the 30th level, it was an endless land of decay. Countless divine kings surrounded them. Looking at the divine items that appeared around them, they no longer hesitated and began their predestined conquest. The war lasted for hundreds of millions of years. It was truly a bitter war. It was the most bitter war in the history of the immortal race. During this period, the number of god monarchs of the immortal race finally decreased. Of course, the degree of decrease wasn't very big. However, it was still there. After hundreds of millions of years, the number of divine king immortals had decreased to less than 700 million. One must know that while they were constantly fighting, new divine king immortals would constantly appear in the world below to replenish their numbers. However, even with the terrifying replenishment speed, there were still casualties. It was clear how bitter and extreme the battle here was. This time, they spent countless years remodeling. Finally, the number of divine king immortals gradually recovered to its original level. In the end, when the remodeling was completed, the number of divine king immortals had increased again, exceeding 700 million. At this time, they finally stopped waiting. They activated the enormous transportation formation and entered the final level, the 31st level. The 31st level was one of the 3 greatest levels of heaven. It was also one of the largest and most fertile levels of heaven. However, at this moment it was not like this. It was not as it should be described. The surrounding space was filled with an endless aura of decay, which was horrifying. If ordinary immortals existed here, they would completely decay and die after inhaling a breath of this aura. Even universe supremes at the first level of the divine king realm would be greatly affected. Therefore, this time, the 8 supreme rulers made a move. No one knew what kind of astonishing handprints they made, but they actually released a strong aura of immortal spirit. This aura of immortal spirit seemed to be a catalyst. It was actually dispelling the aura of decay, and the area of immortal spirit aura in the surrounding area was constantly expanding. Lu Feng knew that this aura of decay was actually only on the surface. The demonic creatures had only decayed these areas on the surface. Once enough help was given, the immortal spirit aura hidden in the depths would finally appear completely and be released again. Just like this, the expedition army of 700 million began the process of remodeling and conquering at the same time. Battles were happening all the time. At this time, the combat power of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level finally made a move. Their opponents were actually the most terrifying existences ranked at the pinnacle of the overlords of the era. They were the demonic creatures at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. In such an environment, before the environment was completely transformed into the most suitable place, the ordinary divine king of the immortal clan could not unleash a strong combat power. Therefore, at this time, only the great beings at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level, who could ignore everything, could make a move. Looking at the combat power of the great beings at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level, Lu Feng's heart was filled with shock. He compared the attacks of the overlords of the era and tried his best to imagine how terrifying the combat power of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level was. However, now that he saw it, Lu Feng could not help but be shocked and horrified. This was the most complete shock and horror, which made the depths of Lu Feng's heart tremble. So powerful, really so powerful! This is the combat power of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Really too terrifying, too unsolvable. Such combat strength was truly unfathomable. From these beings, Lu Feng could even vaguely see the shadow of a supreme ruler. The strongest beings at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level were known as the great beings of the quasi-ruler realm. The quasi-ruler realm was not the pinnacle divine king. This proved that they were actually related to the ruler realm to a certain extent. When they made a move, heaven and earth shook, and countless traces appeared in space and time. All this felt as if they were just gently waving their arms. In the face of the supreme divine king, they did not even need to make a move. Just the slightest aura was enough to annihilate countless times. Even the time overlords at the pinnacle realm or the time overlords at the invincible realm could not exist in the aura of the ultimate sky of the 33rd level. Not to mention fighting, even standing was a problem. This was too exaggerated, too exaggerated. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood why these beings at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level and the 8 supreme rulers did not make a move. Indeed, it was easy for them to make a move and they could destroy everything easily. However, because they were so powerful, every time they made a move, all living beings in the endless space around them would be shaken. If they were not careful, they could cause the immortal tribe to perish as well. It could be said that their combat power was too terrifying and could not be easily used. This time, if it were not for the appearance of the invincible beings at the ultimate sky of the 33rd level, the immortal tribe would not have made a move. Chapter 931. Lu Feng's eyes lit up as he watched the terrifying collision that changed the color of heaven and earth. He knew that in the future, or even in the near future, as long as he gathered the 3 divine kings' forbidden mythological domains, he would be able to form a forbidden mythological domain with his own combat power. Then, even if his main body didn't enter the divine king's realm, he would still be able to suppress everything and possess the combat power of the ultimate sky of the 33 levels. At that time, if I use the ultimate immortal technique again, then my power will really be able to dominate for a short period of time. In the distance, endless battles broke out and appeared continuously. Too many were annihilated. This time, the immortal race's losses had reached an indescribable level. During the 3 billion years of resistance, more than 300 million divine king experts had risen from the 30 levels of heaven below. Logically speaking, the number of divine king experts here should have reached 1 billion. But in the end, the number of divine king experts was less than 600 million. They had lost over 400 million godkings in the clash this time. In the end, after countless difficult collisions, the 31 levels of heaven were completely taken down. Rest and reorganization took a terrifyingly long time to recover. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, the rest and reorganization finally came to an end. Countless existences gradually recovered, and more divine king experts came in to fill in the gap. Looking at the transportation array leading to the 32nd level, although many divine king experts were still resolute, their eyes were no longer filled with the confidence of victory they had in the past. In fact, this was also expected. After all, in the 31st heavens, this place had experienced so many calamities and encountered unprecedented collisions. If it weren't for the constant replenishment of the Divine King in the 30 levels of heaven below, even if they could win this time, their vitality would have been greatly damaged, and they would have been completely finished. If the 31st level was like this, then what about the next 32 levels and the final 33 levels? They really couldn't imagine it. They really didn't dare to imagine it. However, these were the Divine King of the immortal race. They couldn't take a step back. For the future of the immortal race, they had to continue their conquest. Therefore, even though they had lost their belief in victory, they still persisted. They wouldn't take a step back no matter what. The 32nd heaven arrived. Compared to the 31st layer of heaven, the 32nd layer of heaven was much more dangerous. There was no longer any clean ground in this place. Every place and every existence was filled with decay and death. It could be said that this place was truly dangerous, endlessly dangerous. Even a powerful being like the Divine King would be greatly affected by such an aura of decay. The Divine King was once a lofty existence, a name that shocked Lu Feng. However, in the final battle of the primordial immortal devil era, they were like ants. They didn't even have the qualifications to step into the battlefield. This was undoubtedly a great humiliation. Ridiculous, this is really ridiculous. In the primordial universe, those are just the Divine King. They actually covet the secrets of the primordial immortal devil era and want to restore the glory of the primordial immortal devil era. This is simply a joke, the biggest joke of all. Lu Feng really felt sorry for the Divine King in the primordial universe, who had been hiding and swearing to control everything. If they saw this scene, would they still have the courage to want to know everything? In this real battlefield, they were just cannon fodder. They didn't even have the qualifications to be cannon fodder. They were just ants. War, this is the final battle between the two races. Actually, the true story of the primordial immortal devil era is not wrong at all. Furthermore, there was nothing wrong with the legend. It's just that it was misunderstood later. Many people had a common saying about the end of the primordial immortal devil era. It was the tacit understanding of the primordial immortal devil era. The war between the two invincible races, the immortal race and the immortal race, finally caused this invincible era to wither completely. This saying was actually not wrong. It was just that it was misunderstood. Indeed, the collapse of the primordial immortal devil era should have been caused by the war between the immortal race and the immortal race. But the immortal race referred to the immortal race, which included the so-called immortal race. It was the most primordial and greatest immortal race. As for the immortal race, it wasn't the immortal race that separated from the primordial immortal devil era. The immortal race referred to the demonic race. The demonic race is also a unique race. It's filled with endless strangeness and indescribable strangeness. These demonic races' characteristics were basically all the same. However, there were also differences, and the only difference was the existence of life. These demonic race didn't have any aura of life at all. They should be the dead things like those minerals. However, they had all the characteristics of living beings. This made Lu Feng really unable to pinpoint these demonic rays. Endless tragic battles were taking place before his eyes once again. Shocking battles broke out continuously. Countless living beings were dying one after another. The Divine King's powerhouses were dying like raindrops. This scene made everyone tremble in disbelief. Even Lu Feng, who had seen countless battles and witnessed countless tragic scenes, hadn't expected that such a shocking battle would break out in an instant. There was no doubt that this was the grandest war Lu Feng had ever witnessed. It was also the most terrifying and crazy war. This time, the powerhouses of the ultimate sky of the 33 levels were in an uproar. Not long after, the 8 supreme rulers also started to go crazy. Finally, all of them entered the battlefield. To them, this seemed to be the final battle. Countless tragic collisions and deaths were rampant. Billions of demonic race beings withered, died, and turned into ashes. The same was true for billions of immortals. This time, the number of divine kings dead exceeded 200 million. But the war still wasn't over. The most powerful battle was still going on. Countless deaths were still spreading. At this moment, many existences looked as if they were facing death with equanimity. The immortals' persistence and glory were incomparable to any other race. Therefore, in the final moment of their withered and certain death, they chose the most magnificent and heroic way. They chose to be obliterated for all eternity. Ultimate sublimation, turning into an eternal light that transcended time and history. It burned brilliantly for the sake of the final moment, for the sake of leaving behind a ray of hope for future generations. This was the Divine King, the Divine King of the Immortals. The Divine King suppresses the world. The Divine King suppresses the world. There was no mistake about it. There was no mistake at all. This is the true Divine King. Not only were they able to suppress the era when they were alive, but they can also benefit the entire era after death. This is the true Divine King Supreme. The Divine King suppresses the world. Towards these godly kings and sovereigns, Lu Feng had a kind of reverence for them. Although his current complete state and peak strength were enough to surpass countless existences and rank in the top 1 million, or even the top 100,000. But he, Lu Feng, still admired him. Gradually, the temporal supremes began to wither away. Soon, countless epic overlords also began to wither away. Tragic, incomparably tragic. According to Lu Feng's idea, such a battle should be carried out in the 33 levels of heaven. But who would have thought that it would begin in the 32 levels of heaven? And the degree of devastation was so terrifying. According to my idea, the 8 sovereigns should only appear and take action at the final moment. But now they've already begun. What exactly is the purpose of all this? Could it be that the immortal race has an even more powerful trump card? In Lu Feng's opinion, the 8 sovereigns were already the final trump card. But here, before the final moment, it had already begun. They had already started fighting. This undoubtedly puzzled Lu Feng. Of course, it was only because they had appeared in advance. However, he felt that the 8 sovereigns' actions were very appropriate. After all, if the 8 sovereigns didn't take action now, the immortal race would collapse completely. They would really be annihilated completely. The Sovereign Lord truly lives up to his name, Yang Qi said. Their strength isn't something that any living creature can compare to. When they take action, they've really suppressed countless creatures. Every time the 8 sovereigns waved their arms, countless living creatures would be annihilated. The number of demonic creatures on the other side was comparable to the peak strength of the 33 levels of heaven. Unfortunately, for some reason, no apex powerhouses were born among the demonic creatures, nor were there any peerless sovereigns. In that case, the 8 sovereigns were truly invincible. Every time they waved their arms, they suppressed countless demonic creatures and completely annihilated tens of thousands of them. One had to know that apart from the lowest level of the Divine King, there were also quite a few temporal overlords and even epic overlords among the demonic creatures that perished each time. So many were annihilated with a single strike. This was the power and dominance of the sovereigns. Although the 8 supreme sovereigns weren't many in number, the destructive power they could unleash was incomparable to the 8 supreme sovereigns. Lu Feng vaguely saw one of the sovereigns use an ultimate immortal technique like the Outer Dharma Supreme Dharma, which shook the void and shook an era. In an instant, tens of millions of demonic creatures vanished. However, there were simply too many of them. In the extremely short time of the clash, hundreds of millions of demonic creatures had already perished. However, there were still countless people behind them. There were truly countless of them. In an instant, the 8 sovereigns used the invincible power of power again. After seeing so many of the immortal race's divine king perish, they didn't linger and didn't hold back. The power of the sovereign power was unleashed in an instant. Lu Feng vaguely saw dozens of ultimate immortal technique. Each of them was an existence of tens of millions of demonic creatures. As hundreds of ultimate immortal techniques were unleashed, the void on the other side was cleared of countless demonic creatures. At this time, the immortal race's existences became even more frenzied. Even the 8 primogenitors had made their move. What else couldn't they do? Therefore they went crazy. It was truly a terrifying madness. The massacre continued to spread and continue. This led to the deaths of even more immortal kings. However, these deaths didn't make the immortal kings cower in the slightest. They were still frenzied and berserk. Finally, Lu Feng saw it. He saw a scene that shocked him. The battle had progressed to this point. Countless battles had progressed to this moment. Finally, the heaviest casualties had occurred. An expert from the ultimate sky of the 33 layers had died. Chapter 932. Ever since the immortal race's expedition army had appeared, not a single expert from the ultimate sky of the 33 layers had perished. This was because such an expert represented the most invincible realm beneath the sovereign realm. They were half-step sovereigns. However, they had still perished. They had been completely annihilated. This was something that could not be tolerated and could not be believed. The fall of the ultimate heaven expert from the 33rd level left countless people dumbfounded. However, a moment later, they became even more frenzied. This was because the experts from the ultimate sky of the 33 layers represented primogenitors. They were half-step primogenitors. Their deaths had undoubtedly incited a frenzied atmosphere in the immortal race. Demonic creatures had no intelligence whatsoever. They had never known what reverence was. Therefore, when they sensed the madness of the immortal race, they also went crazy. This was true annihilation. It was the most terrifying collision and frenzied obliteration. This battle, the most terrifying massacre in history, had finally reached its final moment. Lu Feng was truly shocked, endlessly shocked. This was a frenzied battle between more than 1 billion immortal kings. Such a scene had never been seen before. All sorts of earth-shattering massacres were unleashed, appearing, and being annihilated. Annihilation, annihilation, annihilation. The main theme here was annihilation. All living beings, all existences, were annihilated. They were annihilated without end. Lu Feng's heart trembled. Although he had seen so many existences, seen so many living beings, and seen so many sacred and miraculous relics, many of which he had created with his own hands, he still couldn't comprehend them. But now, when he saw what was happening in front of him, Lu Feng was still shocked, and he couldn't stop shaking. After all, everything in front of him was too tragic and too magnificent. The final outcome was within Lu Feng's expectations. After all, the 8 sovereigns had already made their move. They were invincible existences to begin with. Once they made their move, the final victory would inevitably belong to the immortal race. However, the outcome of this battle was too tragic. It was unbelievable. When the immortal race had entered, there had been 800 million of them. However, after this battle, there weren't even 300 million left. The number of demonic creatures that had fallen had also reached a shocking 2 billion. All of these 2 billion were at the level of the Divine King. The Divine King of the immortal race was suppressed in this decaying area. Even if there was no suppression, the immortal race was still no match for the demonic race. This time, being able to completely suppress the opponent with the loss of 500 million was already a shocking miracle. Of course, the ones who created this miraculous miracle were those who stood at the pinnacle of existence, those who stood at the pinnacle of combat strength. The battle prowess of the 8 sovereigns is simply too terrifying. If it weren't for their existence, the immortal clan would have been completely annihilated this time. For the first time, Lu Feng had a clear understanding of the pinnacle of existence. This was the greatness of the Sovereign Lord. It was no wonder that even though the Divine King had so many powerhouses, the immortal race had still chosen to wait for the Sovereign Lord to appear before they dared to attack. In the remaining time, the immortal race didn't continue to attack. They chose to remain silent and quietly develop, beginning the longest period of recuperation. Since the start of the expedition, countless years had passed. Hundreds of billions of years had passed. This was undoubtedly a very long period of time. Even for the entire immortal race, it was extremely long. After this period of time, the immortal race had finally developed once again. This time, the immortal race's development relied on the existence of the 32 levels of heaven. One had to know that the first level of heaven was larger than the original primal chaos immortal demon continent. It was more fertile and more suitable for cultivation. The latter added up was comparable to thousands of original primal chaos immortal demon continents. This was especially true for the 32 heavens. The area here was really incomparably vast. Although there were no divine objects here due to the corrosion of the demonic creatures, but when the immortal aura reappeared, this place was really the most suitable place for cultivation compared to other places except for the absence of divine objects. Next, it was an extremely long period of recuperation. This time, it was a full 600 billion years. 600 billion years. In the original universe, this was comparable to the cycle of reincarnation of an era. But here, it was merely a period of recuperation. Without a doubt, this was really too long. The number of the Divine King of the immortal race had once again increased explosively. At the beginning of the expedition, there were 50 million Divine King powerhouses. Previously, after the battle of the 32 levels of heaven, the number had sharply decreased to only 300 million. But now, after 600 billion years of development, the number of the Divine King of the immortal race had increased explosively. Now, the number had finally surpassed the peak of the past by more than 2 times, reaching almost 1.6 billion. Of course, besides the Divine King, the number of time overlords and epic overlords had also increased by a lot. Of course, the most important reason for this was the transformation brought about by the last battle. After this battle, the number of the great beings of the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level had reached an unprecedented number of 500. 500, these were 500 ultimate heaven of the 33rd level and quasi-dominators. Any one of them was enough to shock countless eras. Of course, these were beings who had just stepped into this realm. And because of their talents, they were destined to be ultimate heaven fighters. Their true combat power could not reach the level of heaven-defying. But even so, it was enough to shock the world. After all, these were 500 beings of the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level. It's just a pity that with so many ultimate heaven and quasi-dominators, not a single one has been able to break through the final shackles and enter the final realm. This is a tragedy, a great tragedy. After so many years of development, there was still no supreme dominator born. This made Lu Feng's admiration for the human sovereign stage increase by a lot. Moreover, the majority of these beings of the ultimate heaven really can't be considered quasi-dominators. They are only ultimate heaven powerhouses. Quasi-dominators were beings who already had the power of a dominator. They already had the terrifying power of a dominator. Although they were only half-step dominators, their combat power was absolutely shocking. However, the combat power of ultimate heaven powerhouses was slightly weaker. After all, ultimate heaven powerhouses were not quasi-dominators. Finally, at the peak of development, the immortal race's expedition army was once again in turmoil. They gathered and fused together, beginning the final gathering. Countless beings stood in place, waiting for the arrival of the final moment. At this time, the 8 supreme dominators appeared. They walked out of the void and together with the 500 invincible beings of the ultimate heaven of the 33rd level and quasi-dominators, appeared in front of the countless beings. Looking at the world-shocking one, 6 billion divine king supremes in front of them, the 8 supreme dominators' eyes flickered. They seemed to have decided on something. In the end, he only waved his arm gently, as if saying something. Lu Feng could clearly feel the turmoil of the countless beings and the excitement of these divine king powerhouses. However, as the 8 supreme dominators spoke together and used their power of power, the excitement finally disappeared completely. They only remained silent, an endless silence. At this time, more than 100,000 existences walked out of the 1.6 billion divine king supremes. 100,000, it was 100,000. This was not a random selection of 1,000,000, but 100,000 powerhouses. They were the strongest powerhouses of the 1.6 billion immortal kings. In other words, these 100,000 powerhouses were actually overlords of an era. 100,000 overlords of an era. This was a number that would make future generations despair. Once an overlord of an era was born in future generations, they would be able to leave their mark on their era. However, it was a pity that only a few overlords were born in the later generations throughout the countless years of time. The current era of technological civilization could be considered the pinnacle of history because 3 overlords of an era had been born in this era. However, in Lu Feng's opinion, this was really a joke. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. It was a helpless and mocking smile. Lu Feng was indeed mocking. He was mocking those who thought they were infallible. He was mocking his own ignorance. I used to think that once an overlord became an overlord in the primordial immortal demon era, one would be considered an overlord. But now, it seems like this is also a joke. There were 100,000 overlords of an era here. In other words, the power of an overlord during the peak of the primordial immortal demon era was only qualified to participate in the final expedition. This was their only strength and the only way they could prove the value of their existence. How pitiful, only the overlords of the epochs could participate in this expedition. The 8 supreme overlords would lead the 533 ultimate heavens experts and 100,000 overlords. This would be the lineup for the final expedition. In fact, Lu Feng was very much in favor of this arrangement. After all, during the conquest of the 32 levels of heaven, he had already seen that the ones who could decide everything were the top experts. Now, in the battle against the demonic creatures, Divine King experts no longer had much power. The Divine King Supremes can no longer adapt to the environment of the 32 levels of heaven. Therefore, it is only right to give up on them. Chapter 933. It was only right to give up on using the Divine King during the expedition. These Divine King experts couldn't even adapt to the environment. In such an environment they would be tortured and killed. They wouldn't be of much help even if they went. Therefore, it was only right that they didn't go with them. Soon, the formation of 100,000 people was complete. At this moment, the teleportation array lit up slightly. This time, Lu Feng was puzzled. Then, he went completely silent. According to the past, what appeared before his eyes should be the image after the transformation. However, this time around, it failed. That was because there was no longer any image at all. Could it be that the memory has already ended, and this is the only memory sealed in the 5th level? Lu Feng remained silent and doubtful. However, Lu Feng soon understood that he was still in history. That was because he was still in the same image. Everything around him was still in the 32 levels of heaven. However, he couldn't see what had happened in the last level of heaven, the 33 levels of heaven. Therefore, Lu Feng was really helpless. Lu Feng knew that the real shock and many secrets should be hidden in the final 33 levels of heaven. He really wanted to see it, but unfortunately, Lu Feng really couldn't see it. He couldn't see it at all. This was a sorrow that belonged to Lu Feng. Sighs, endless sighs. Just like that, he watched the development of countless immortals and demons in the 32 levels of heaven as time passed. After an unknown amount of time, just as Lu Feng was feeling a little lost, the huge teleportation array finally lit up again. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes shone with a startling light. He looked at the light with an extremely excited expression. Lu Feng knew that they had returned. The strongest immortal race existences that had gone to the 33 levels of heaven to conquer had finally returned. As the endless brilliance flickered, many existences finally walked out of the teleportation array slowly. Lu Feng took a deep breath when he saw the number and the injuries on everyone's faces. When they had gone, there had been 100,000 overlords and 533 levels of the ultimate sky. However, the number of people who had returned was less than 1/10 of what they had been in the past. Furthermore, everyone was injured. Nearly half of them had suffered indescribable injuries. It could be said that this scene was extremely tragic. Moreover, what really shocked Lu Feng were the injuries on the bodies of the top powerhouses. Those were all truly terrifying scars, scars that were extremely shocking to the eye. It could be said that an ordinary god king would have been completely annihilated if such a heavy injury had been inflicted on them. However, in such a situation, these epical overlords were only severely injured. In addition to these injuries, the bodies of the ultimate sky powerhouses on the 33 levels of the ultimate sky were also covered in scars. And Lu Feng also saw it. He saw a horrifying scene. There had been a total of 500 ultimate sky powerhouses on the 33 levels of the ultimate sky. Although some of them might have been ultimate sky powerhouses and very few of them had entered the quasi-ruler realm. However, they were still a fighting force that belonged to the 33 levels of heaven after all. Such a fighting force was almost indestructible. But now, there were less than 30 of the 500 that had returned. It could be said that the losses of these ultimate sky powerhouses were even more severe. Furthermore, Lu Feng also saw that the 8 ultimate rulers were all injured. The one with the most severe injuries had even lost half of his body and was in a state of hibernation. This was what shocked Lu Feng the most. The ultimate rulers represented great existences that dominated everything. However, such great existences were actually in such a miserable state. This was simply inconceivable. It had to be said that the Sovereign Lord was the embodiment of unparalleled greatness. Nothing could possibly compare to him in terms of terror. Even quasi-supremes couldn't contend against them, let alone existences below the supremes. Even the demonic creatures on the 33 levels of the ultimate sky would be annihilated instantly in the hands of such ultimate sky powerhouses without being able to do anything. However, such powerful and mighty sovereigns had actually suffered such serious injuries and were on the verge of death. This was simply too unbelievable. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng quietly watched the powerhouses who had returned from death. Finally, Lu Feng understood. A glimmer of brilliance appeared in his eyes. At the beginning, Lu Feng had already thought that they had failed when he saw such a tragic scene. After all, How could they still win after so many powerhouses had fallen? However, when Lu Feng looked at their expressions, he understood that they already knew what was going on. They hadn't failed. In the end, they had succeeded. This was because in the next moment, although countless divine king powerhouses were grieving, their eyes flashed with unconcealable joy. They finally gathered together again and began to enter the final transportation array. They advanced towards the 33 levels of heaven, the final and most mysterious levels of heaven. This time Lu Feng saw it. The scene before his eyes finally changed completely. He had entered the 33 levels of heaven. He finally saw the final existence of the final Holy Land, which was also where the legendary 33 levels of heaven were. This place had been completely transformed. Lu Feng was filled with doubts about the transformation before his eyes. He could feel that the 33 heavens was just like what the sovereign immortal master had said. It was as big as a universe. However, such an incomparably huge world and environment had been completely transformed. The epic Overlord's power was much stronger than the ordinary divine king. However, after the battle and after suffering so many injuries, the transformation shouldn't have been completed. All of this was too inconceivable. It made one's heart palpitate. However, everything had been completed just like that. Lu Feng really couldn't refute this. He watched as the divine king powerhouses, which now numbered more than 7 billion, came here and started frantically building and multiplying. Lu Feng was silent. He was really silent. This was because he felt that things wouldn't be completed like this. Logically speaking, the final location of the demonic creatures should be within the 33 levels of heaven. This should be the final location of the demonic creatures. However, Lu Feng really didn't see any demonic creatures here. This wasn't normal. This was really too abnormal. After all, the existence of demonic creatures still existed even now. According to the eternal immortal master of the final era, whom he had met in the abyss of oblivion, these monsters had never been destroyed. They had always existed in this world, and their existence was endless. It was difficult to encounter them. There were 14 continents in the world left behind in this space, and the underground of these 14 continents were all interconnected. The demonic creatures all lived in these continents. This showed that the demonic creatures were really too powerful. Even in the second universe, they were still one of the most terrifying disasters. After all, the eternal immortal Lord had said that one of the purposes of the existence of the 3 Holy Lands was to fight against these demonic creatures. Of course, it was also because of these reasons that Lu Feng guessed that the immortal race's expedition to the 33 levels of heaven would end in failure. They would eventually weaken and prevent the complete destruction of the primitive, immortal devil era. However, this wasn't the case. It wasn't like this at all. Such a scene caused Lu Feng to be filled with questions, endless questions. Could it be that I was wrong from the beginning? Could it be that the demonic creatures in the second universe are really the last of the demonic creatures? Lu Feng started to wonder if he had made a mistake. Had he been wrong all along? He was silent. An endless silence. This was because Lu Feng knew that if the memory of history was still there, then everything had not stopped. Everything was still going on. He knew that the primitive immortal devil era was a world full of impermanence. It was a world full of strange things. Therefore, he really couldn't guess what would happen next. Gradually, reproduction began. Countless divine king experts used shocking methods to build countless places suitable for living. The process was very, very fast. In Lu Feng's opinion, all the construction had taken less than 100 years. Just like that, the final and most powerful Holy Land of the immortal race appeared in the 33 levels of heaven. Then, countless immortals from the lower realms ascended to the 33 levels of heaven. When the number of ascended reached 1 trillion, the 8 supreme juggernauts appeared once again. After recuperating for a long time, they finally recovered from their heavy injuries. At this time, after countless years of development, many existences had become stronger. Of course, they were still far from the peak when they conquered the 33 heavens for 100,000 eras. Even so, such a lineup could be considered extravagant. Countless existences gathered and fused together. The number of Divine King experts also increased again, reaching 1.9 billion. Lu Feng also knew that this number would continue to increase over time. After all, their territory was already vast enough, and the cultivation environment was incomparably luxurious and suitable. When the 1.9 billion powerhouses gathered, all the peak powerhouses who had participated in the final expedition, except for those who had already perished, were present. Under the leadership of the 8 supreme rulers and over 100 powerhouses from the 33 levels of heaven, they began to charge towards the centermost point of the 33 levels of heaven. Their speed was incomparably shocking. With the speed of a god king, if they wanted to cross a galaxy, they could accomplish it with a single thought. However, this place was an existence comparable to a universe. It was naturally not something that could be accomplished with a single thought. However, their speed was still incomparably ferocious. Along the way, they constantly used spatial leap. At many places, they also used some giant transportation formations to speed up their journey. Chapter 934. In the beginning, Lu Feng was also puzzled by the existence of those teleportation formations. He did not expect there to be teleportation formations in this place. However, Lu Feng soon figured it out. He knew that those teleportation formations must have been left behind by those epical overlords when they conquered this place. Lu Feng confirmed his guess when he saw those epical overlords skillfully leading the way to the location of those teleportation formations. In the blink of an eye, many existences had crossed countless starry skies. With the enhancement of those teleportation formations, their speed had reached an unimaginable level. It was an indescribably terrifying speed. Vaguely, they had arrived at the true final destination. It was a door that stood quietly in the endless starry sky. It was the final door that covered time and space, the sun and the moon and everything in eternity. "What is this?" Lu Feng exclaimed in astonishment. His eyes were filled with confusion, shock, and an indescribable feeling. In the image, it was sometimes there and sometimes it was blurry. Some things could not even be seen. This feeling was so strange that Lu Feng could not describe it. However, Lu Feng was sure that it really existed. What is this thing? Why do I feel such an indescribable aura from the door? This aura was really indescribable. If Lu Feng had to add it, it would be a feeling of the end of everything, the ultimate feeling. Moreover, this feeling of finality was not pure, because Lu Feng felt a kind of hope from this finality, a completely new feeling. This was a strange and indescribable feeling of contradiction. Lu Feng took a deep breath. The confusion in his eyes was clear. However, the many existences from the immortal race below were excited when they saw the door. They looked at the door at the same time and knelt down at the same time. Their expressions were reverent and trembling with excitement. It was as if there was something in the door that made them excited. Finally, after countless kowtows, the many existences from the immortal race slowly stood up. The 8 supreme rulers used their extreme power at the same time. They actually relied on their great power to forcibly open the endless final door. Lu Feng had no idea what was behind the door, nor was he clear about it. He discovered that he could not see anything after the door was opened. Inside was a hazy and completely illusory area. He could not see anything. He could only feel confused. Lu Feng realized that many of the existences had gone mad when they saw the door open and what was inside. They had gone completely mad. Even the 8 supreme sovereigns were going crazy. In the end, all of them walked into the abyss. Time flowed by once again. Lu Feng felt that an endless amount of time had passed since the 9 billion strong lineup had entered. It was truly an endless amount of time. He did not know whether it was thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, millions of years, or hundreds of millions of years. Finally, the immortal race's existence has steadily developed in the 33 layers of heavens. They have completely occupied the other 32 layers of heavens outside of the 33 layers of heavens. It had to be said that the development of the immortal race was like a geyser. Once it was born, it was unstoppable. It wasn't that the immortal race did not want to occupy the 33 levels of heaven, but that the 33 levels of heaven were simply too big. It was simply boundless. Just the area of the 33 levels of heaven was many times larger than the other 32 levels of heaven combined. Even a powerful race like the immortal race, which had developed for countless years, could not fill the 33 levels of heaven with their imprints. Lu Feng watched quietly. He was powerless to change anything because the image only existed in front of him. In fact, Lu Feng also knew that the existence of this image recorded the most shocking events of this period. Therefore, he understood that something was bound to happen in front of him. Something was bound to happen here. Sure enough, after waiting for an unknown number of years, a group of Divine King experts appeared again. From a place far away, they followed the familiar path and arrived in front of the hazy door. This time, 2 billion Divine King experts appeared. Among them, there were thousands of experts from the 33 levels of heaven and close to 300,000 overlords. This was another unparalleled power. Then, the powerful immortal race used their unparalleled power to finally open the door again. Everything was the same as before. All the immortal kings entered and did not come out again. Time continued to pass, change, and continue. In the countless years that followed, more than 5 groups of immortal race existences arrived. Each time, the number of Divine King experts that came was greater than the previous time. The last time, the number reached an unprecedented 5 billion Divine King experts. The number of Divine King experts that entered had exceeded 20 billion. Yes, 20 billion Divine King experts. Not 20 billion virtual king experts. However, after 20 billion Divine King experts entered the final door, not a single one appeared. Not a single one returned. This made Lu Feng confused and perplexed about everything in the final door. He didn't know why he couldn't see what was happening. He didn't know why he couldn't feel anything. But this was reality. It was the same when I entered the 33 levels of heaven last time. And it's the same now. What is it? Why? Lu Feng was a little crazy. He really wanted to know the secret. After all, this was the ultimate secret of the universe. At this moment, Lu Feng was certain and understood. Inside the final door was the place that truly contained all the secrets. Inside the final door was the place where the truly shocking secrets lay. The secret of the end of the immortal demon era wasn't the demonic creatures, but everything in here. But he was still standing at the edge and couldn't see anything. This caused Lu Feng to become incomparably frantic. Time continued to pass, and Lu Feng continued to pondering over the possible truth. Finally, when Lu Feng was thinking to the extreme, a shocking scene appeared in the void. This is the great cosmic calamity. This is the true great cosmic calamity. This is the craziest and most terrifying great cosmic calamity. Lu Feng couldn't believe it. According to legend, the great cosmic calamity only appeared after the end of the immortal demon era. It was the ultimate calamity after the immortal demon era. However, at this moment, the great tribulation of the universe actually appeared right in front of his eyes. So this is how it is. It turns out that the place where the great catastrophe of the universe will appear is here. It's actually inside this portal. It's actually at the peak of the 33 levels of heaven, in the center of the 33 levels of heaven, in this mysterious final portal. I finally understand. Lu Feng finally understood. He finally knew the root cause of the end of the immortal demon era. He finally understood how the countless immortal demons disappeared in the immortal demon era. So, this was how it was. It was actually caused by the great cosmic calamity. But, what exactly happened? What exactly happened? Lu Feng understood that only a supreme ruler would be able to survive the great calamity of the universe, and the epic overlords could engrave their names. But I don't believe it. I absolutely don't believe it. The divine king of 20 billion. This was a 20 billion godly monarch. The divine king of 20 billion. That's enough to cause a qualitative change. No matter how terrifying the great cosmic calamity is, it's absolutely impossible to contend against 20 billion divine king of 20 billion. This was the reality. This was the real situation. Lu Feng saw it through the haze. He saw the end of the universe. He saw everything in the 33 levels of heaven being completely annihilated and disappearing. Everything had completely disappeared. They no longer existed. Lu Feng was perplexed and confused. He could only watch helplessly as everything came to an end. It's over. Everything really came to an end. Lu Feng stared blankly at the Saint Remains stone pillar in front of him. In the end, he fell silent. Lu Feng, you're awake. The two immortal masters slowly walked over when they saw Lu Feng walk out of his seclusion. They looked at Lu Feng without saying anything. Although they didn't say anything, their eyes shone with a strange light. They thought that they had discovered that the current Lu Feng seemed to have become a different person. He was very quiet. Although he didn't speak before, the Lu Feng of the past was a kind of tranquility. Now, however, he was silent. The two immortal masters were puzzled. After a moment of silence, they finally spoke. Lu Feng, what's wrong? The second greeting finally woke Lu Feng up. He looked at the sovereign immortal master, and shook his head slightly after a moment of silence. Nothing, I just thought of a few things. It's just that I'm deeply moved. The two immortal masters hadn't expected Lu Feng to say that he was deeply moved. They looked at Lu Feng, wanting to ask him something. In the end, Lu Feng only shook his head slightly and walked forward. The two immortal masters didn't ask anything in the end. After a moment of silence, they followed Lu Feng forward. Lu Feng, one of the three sacred lands, the eternal sacred land, is up ahead, in the void. Lu Feng released his invincible power of power and transformed into the perfect flowing time immortal. Accompanied by the two immortal masters, he left the sovereign sacred land. The two immortal masters had already made their decision. They also understood that only Lu Feng could carry the banner of the future era. Only Lu Feng could do it. The others couldn't. Far from it. Moreover, when they saw that Futu had chosen Lu Feng, they were even more certain of their decision. Therefore, they came here to accompany Lu Feng and obtain the other two great essences. While helping Lu Feng reach the limit heavens, they could also obtain the complete Futu mark. This would allow Lu Feng to summon Futu and open a passage to the outside world. Furthermore, they had already confirmed one thing, and that was that in the future there would definitely be a true apocalypse. Apart from Lu Feng, there was no one else who could help them survive such a disaster. Therefore, they wanted to help Lu Feng and help Lu Feng become a great being. Lu Feng nodded slightly at the sovereign immortal master's words. He looked into the distance at the hazy sacred land that shone with strange light. His expression was one of indescribable strangeness. This is the eternal sacred land. This was the eternal sacred land after all. Lu Feng was filled with countless emotions towards the eternal sacred land. Of the three sacred lands, the eternal sacred land was the first one he'd met. Back in the sealed land, in the oblivion abyss, he had met the eternal immortal master. From him, he had obtained a mark of Futu, which had made him even more powerful. His martial path incarnation had reached the 10th grade. Without a doubt, the metamorphosis that time was truly terrifying, truly incomparably terrifying. That had been Lu Feng's greatest fortuitous encounter. Therefore, he had strange feelings towards the eternal sacred land. This time, he was finally here. Lu Feng's complicated expression didn't escape the eyes of the two immortal masters. They looked at Lu Feng with confusion. In the end, it was the Sovereign Prime who asked, "What's wrong, Lu Feng? Is there something wrong with the eternal sacred land?" Lu Feng shook his head slightly. "No, there's nothing wrong with the eternal sacred land. It's just that it reminds me of someone." The two Saint Lords looked at Lu Feng and didn't say anything. They were waiting for Lu Feng to explain. Lu Feng finally spoke up, looking at the eternal sacred land. "I truly admire the eternal sacred land's existence." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.